Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Elevate Review Panel for Individuals and Creative Businesses. Day 7, we have 10 review panels for individuals and creative businesses, and then 9 for nonprofits in Thrive and Elevate. My name is Jesus Pantel. I am the Cultural Funding Supervisor in the Economic Development Department for the Cultural Arts Division. With me is DJ Lozada. She is our outside equity facilitator, making sure that both city staff as well as our review panelists keep equity in mind while reviewing these applications. The panelists have reviewed all of the applications prior to today with scores and comments. Their scores are tentative and can change depending on the feedback they hear from their fellow panelists, but they are not required to change their scores. We have asked the panelists not to repeat anything that has been stated by other panelists. And also we are not scoring on consensus. So panelists may have different takes. That's fine. They were brought on for their expertise in various areas. So if they're not repeating or providing commentary, they're in agreement with what has been stated by other panelists already. We ask that the panelists provide constructive criticism and feedback for future improvement. We will be recording this application process, and we will also be timing it. There's 10 minutes allotted per application. I will be timing that, and if we have any kind of technical difficulties, internet glitches, anything like that, we will pause the timer so that way that application gets the full 10 minutes that it is required. Or that is allocated to it. I think that is the only other thing is we have asked the panelists to look beyond grantsmanship. So if the application information is in there, but it was hard to find, they may comment on that. They also were not required to, but they could go either if they're familiar with your work personally, or they went to your website or social media. They can use that information when scoring the applications. But other than that, they have to have that firsthand experience. They looked at your website and social media, or it's just based on whatever is in the application. Panelists are not comparing one application to another when they are scoring. They are scoring each application individually based on how it meets, answers the items in the scoring rubric. So with that being said, we will get started. Our first application up for review is Austin Sound and Modern Poetry Machine. Georgian and Bailey are our primary and secondary, and the 10-minute timer will start whenever Georgian starts giving his commentary.
Okay, welcome everybody. And evaluating this proposal, looking at the areas, the key constituents, and creative mission. I thought the application was proposed was rooted in serving the communities that are at immediate risk of cultural erasure. So I thought they did really well of hitting that area. In the history of service, I noted that they have a long history of serving the communities that are at immediate risk, and they were able to identify those organizations and those communities. Cultural leadership. Communities are, again, they're hitting those areas through the individuals that are participating in this organization. From the applicant to the advisory boards to the creative advisor. I thought they had the background, they fit the individuals that they're trying to serve here in Austin. Cultural activities, same thing. Noted the ideas that they are hitting the key constituents that the Thrive is looking for here. They clearly described the who, the what, the when, and the where in their application. I was really pleased with that. Liked the way they kind of had it all laid out there for us. Easy to see, easy to read. Intersection and inclusionality. I think the intersection was identified, was clearly stated. Including race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, through their lived experiences. They clearly identified all that. In terms of accessibility, Proposed activities included deep and impactful adaptations of services to individuals with disabilities. I like the fact that they were using professional sign language interpreters or willing to do so, use subtitles and descriptions in their films. In terms of language, the activities were deep and impactful adaptations of service to non-speaking individuals, non-speaking English-speaking individuals. They show that through the Spanish-speaking crowd. Make sure I get the right information here. I'm looking. Spanish and English subtitle editors, films with streaming series to include subtitles in English and in Spanish. In terms of marketing, I thought they did a great job of hitting numerous outlets that they clearly indicated, anything from Facebook to TikTok, to newspapers, San Antonio, Dallas, Houston. They mentioned how to bring in individuals from outside of Austin, how to get them to here to Austin through KUT, Austin American Statesman, advertisements in English and in Spanish radio stations. I thought they did well there. And then the budget for number 9. I noted good marketing strategy. I did like to see how they were going to reach out to their non-English speaking individuals with disabilities that are being recruited. It did say that we invite non-English speaking Austinites to enjoy our programming. Sorry, that was for the marketing. Okay. And then the budget. I thought the budget was adequately proposed and adequately explained is what I noted. Okay. And then real quickly, I forgot to introduce the organization. They were, as Jesus noted, it was Austin Sound and Modern Poetry Machine. They were proposing putting on poetry throughout the city of Austin locations, inviting, having, various marginalized communities, partnerships throughout Austin participating in this event. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Secondary, Bailey.
Hello. So I agree with most what was presented. I think this is a very clear and concise application. I do really appreciate that in the key constituencies, they really broke down who, why, what is happening within that community, and then how they're working to serve it through their events. I really enjoy that they had multiple events that were going to be occurring throughout the city to reach broader audiences and in different formats as well. Let's see. Everything was really clear. I just have, other positive notes there. Not a ton of like constructive feedback. I really appreciate the responses being broken down into the like who, when, what, where type of formats. That's really all I have for that one. Very clear and concise.
Agree.
Oh, you're muted, DJ.
Does anyone have anything else that they would like to add to the discussion of this particular application? Any differing opinions?
I would add that I really very much enjoy the concept of bringing literature, spoken word, written word to different audiences in different formats. I personally felt like I would like more explicit details on how each audience is interacting with a particular piece of the event. And just seeing that explained with a little more depth would help me, who is not from Austin and doesn't know the history of this organization, to just see this a little bit more explicitly.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Brooks. And of course, she's speaking to intersectionality, which is a very key component, and how these communities are all impacted by the work. And so we appreciate that feedback. And with that, Jesus.
Thank you, everyone. If there are no additional comments, differing opinions, thoughts you have that have not been stated by other panelists already? Seeing as there are none, if you would please finalize your scores and raise your hand when you have done so. Georgian, Brooks, Susan, and Bailey. Thank you, everyone. Our next application up for review is Walnut Creek Elementary School Mural Project. Susan and Georgian are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Sure. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I felt this was a really strong application overall. The project, as a reminder, it was a mural project with students at McBee Elementary School, a Title I school. And I felt, the description of the artist's key constituencies. They did a good job of demonstrating, their history of practice and working with specifically Title I schools that are attended by historically underrepresented and underserved demographics that the Elevate grants are aiming to serve through this funding. And again, just talking about their history of service, they themselves, not necessarily having lived experience as a member of that community, but, dedicating their artistic practice to serving those communities. So I felt that was really strongly communicated. And they also give a description of the different elementary schools that they've worked with. And so I felt that was all very, very strong. Also, they speak really well about the level of engagement directly involving students in the process of, designing the mural. And there were also some good examples of broader community engagement, the school community. So they speak about a reception, the principal sharing student stories about the process of creating the mural. So I thought that was all very strong, good opportunity creation as well, where I would have liked to see a bit more, how do I put this? I felt that their description of, the response to accessibility was lacking in some places. And so it wasn't really clear, I suppose, how, the project was going to be accessible to people. I think I wrote, the accommodations appear to be upon request only, and so they're not really specialized. They're hosting activities in an ADA accessible facility, but it wasn't really clear how they were going to involve trained professionals in that process. Same for language accessibility. But overall, interesting project. I think that's all the comments that I had.
Thank you. Secondary, Georgian?
I'm going to agree with most of that. This is actually one of the more, applications that I enjoyed the most because of the way it was actually presented and the way it was kind of set up. It looked like it was very clear, very thorough. After going through the application, you can see clearly what they're trying to do and how they have done things in the past. They did a great job of explaining their history and showing, all the different places where they have done some work. I did like the interaction between the artist and his target audience there, which is the elementary schools or the schools. And same, I thought the one area that kind of needed a little help was in the accessibility as well. I basically noted that the lack of use of any trained personnel. Proposed activities included deep, impactful adaptations and services to individuals with disabilities, but would like to see the use of trained individuals. Did like the use of school for the support system as well, showing all the other activity, all the other characters at the schools that were being supportive of his work or her work, the author's work. So I liked it, and just that one area. Just how else could they help individuals with accessibility? Nothing more than that. Thank you.
I did have
hearing
one
that.
comment,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead, Susan. No.
I scrolled down and found one more comment that I think would be helpful to the applicant, just about the budget. So there doesn't really appear to be anything in the budget related to the mural unveiling ceremony, which to me seems like a pretty crucial piece of the project in terms of engagement, community engagement. And so there wasn't really anything I could see in the budget related to that, and the artist and publicist fees seemed a bit high.
Okay. Anyone else have any feedback they'd like to, anyone with any divergent opinions or Brooks?
Me again. I thought
Hi,
that their
Brooks.
accessibility was wonderful. And I did think that because they acknowledged like different height levels, accessible art supplies, they talked about sensory things as well. So not just physical disabilities, but also neurodivergence. And I guess my interpretation of using school administrators, teachers' aides was that they are trained professionals and that they would be truly a critical piece of making this not only within their physical facility, but in terms of getting additional information on particular individuals' needs. I think the only other thing I would mention, not relating to accessibility, but along the levels of leadership, is that it does seem like the level of engagement within the constituencies could change dramatically based on who is available at the school to be part of this as well. That it could just sort of change year to year. We don't know who's really going to be part of it in the next year. It is a Title I school, but who is the leadership of that school? Who's helping collaborate on this? And so that was a little hard. I don't know if the applicant could say that explicitly for sure one way or the other. And that was the only thing that really I sort of thought about, was like, oh, how would you know? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Jesus.
Thank you, everyone. I will say panelists are scoring each application individually based on how it meets the review criteria. I'm not comparing them to other applications. With that being said, are there any other comments panelists have? Thoughts that you have that haven't been stated by someone else already? If there are no further comments from the panel, please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Georgian, Brooks, Bailey, and Susan. Alrighty, thank you, everyone. Our next application up for review is Elisa Taylor Went. Susan and Bailey are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, yeah, I just had to pull this one up again for myself. So the Allison Taylor Went project is a video installation project, and one of the key strengths I think of this application is just how well they describe the purpose of the video and the kinds of conversations that it could elicit around subjects like power and identity. The artists themselves also identifies as a member of a community that has been marginalized. And so I think on those 2 points, they did a really good job of explaining how their project meets the criteria for funding here for Elevate. Also, clearly very committed to their artistic practice, a good description of their artistic background and history and what their artwork is about. I think, the response to the question about intersectionality was fairly general and non-specific. So I would have liked to see a little bit more in the application about how, intersectionality will be incorporated into the planning of the project. So I can see their artistic vision, but not necessarily how, how intersectionality is going to be incorporated into this project specifically. Otherwise, otherwise I didn't have, there's nothing else that I wanted to highlight specifically. about it. I just had to scroll all the way down this time. I didn't last time.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Secondary, Bailey?
Hi, yes, so definitely very passionate and exciting applicant. Some notes that I was thinking of are looking at the accessibility section. They were very clear in most aspects, but of how they wanted to implement the various accessibility aspects such as the language. But there were just some moments where I feel like it could be just a bit more clear of how exactly they were going to implement that. Like they have the plan and they have the idea of what they want to make happen. But I just felt maybe there was like a slight disconnect of like what they want to have happen to how to actually implement that in their proposed activity. Um, yeah, so mostly like just the language accessibility part and the ADA accessibility. But otherwise, I think that's really the only note I have. Like, I do agree that there could have been just some moments of bit more clarity, but I think they overall have a strong and exciting application.
Okay, is there anyone else who has a different opinion that might want to add to the discussion? Just as a reminder of the term intersectionality, Susan, in her point, I just want to take a point of order to say that, to remind us that intersectionality describes the many ways in which various forms of discrimination can intersect, creating special vulnerability for some. And these vulnerabilities to systemic and institutional racism are an integral part of that intersectionality. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jesus.
Thank you, DJ. Thank you, everyone. Are there additional comments, thoughts that you have that have not been stated by others? I'd like to give the panelists a bit of time in case they're scrolling through their notes or just if something hits them. But if there are no further comments on this application, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Brooks, Susan, everybody. Alrighty, thank you, everyone. Our next application up for review is The Gala, An Evening with Devante, presented by Rana and Studio 22 Productions. Brooks and Georgian are our primary and secondary. And Brooks, whenever you're ready to begin. Oh, and you're muted. So the timer will start when you're unmuted and giving your commentary.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Just a reminder that this project proposed very clearly sort of a three-part live event that had music, fashion, and art. Very appreciative of that clear formatting, again, addressing who, what, where, specifically the attention paid to the impact. So for me, that was so wonderful as a reader to be able to say, have them draw direct conclusions. We're trying to increase the visibility, we're facilitating networking. It was just very easy to follow and understand the choices being made. The support materials that this applicant provided were also excellent, very dynamic. It was very clear, again, to see what they were hoping to do in the future. Also acknowledging that not every application would be able to do something like this because they have had the experience of other similar sorts of performances or experiences. But for me, that was very clear to see the involvement of people, that again, the intersectionality that would occur in this. I think that it's very deeply rooted in communities of color, supporting artists in that way. I had very few concerns, if any. The leadership seems very clear and very focused, along with their production needs. That all seemed to be very practiced, along with how they explained where they were going to have it, the accessibility. Everything was very clear from my perspective.
Great, thank you. Secondary, Georgian. Oh, and you're muted.
I really like this application as well. I thought it was a good, solid application. It thoroughly explained what they're trying to do, and you could easily see it throughout the application. I had a consistent feel that I thought they were trying to address communities that had been marginalized throughout our scoring area. But in the first section, even though it was there, clearly stated throughout, the only thing on that first section, the key constituencies, maybe if they just explain that or show that a little bit more, how they're going to help marginalized societies. They do throughout the rest of the application, just in that one area. Maybe they could reword that or enhance the focus point there a little bit more. But it was clearly stated throughout the application in all the other areas. Outside of that, I did see one other comment that I had. Disabilities were good. Non-English speaking communities are good. The marketing strategy, I thought it had a really good marketing strategy. Just would like to see a little more clarification on how they're going to assist or how they're going to focus their attention with members with disabilities in their marketing. But great application all the way through. And that's all that I had for that. Thank you.
Okay. Just as a reminder, whenever you're scoring and reviewing these applications, Jesus will correct me if I say anything wrong, but if you can find examples of how they're addressing a particular issue related to the rubric, then that is allowed as a practice to still, give you reason to score it higher than you otherwise might. Jesus, with that, I'll turn it over to you to correct me in any way, or if there's anybody that has anything to add.
I wanted to have a quick note about the key constituencies. Although it was very clear, the only note that I had is I was a bit unsure of exactly who the key constituencies were. They listed that it was emerging artists. I just wanted to know specifically like what community of emerging artists, like is there a specific target community within that? It just felt like a slightly broad in that category. That was my only note that I had. Everything else was pretty strong.
Right. And I think also to your point, Bailey, like I did feel there was a laundry list of groups cited as potentially benefiting from the project. But in cultural leadership, they talk about how they are the sole decision maker. And so I was curious about how, in developing this event, how they would actually actively involve some of those groups that they were targeting and wanting to attend their event. And also, I think they did, I do think there was another strength there that we didn't highlight about just highlighting Austin as a cultural destination. I think they did a good job of describing how their project would do that.
I would like to just read my comment on the key constituencies. Basically, I just noted that the proposal is rooted in serving communities that have experienced other forms of institutional marginalization. Would like to see the proposal serving more communities at immediate risk for myself. And that's kind of just to help out the applicant so they can understand at least my point what I was trying to say there, which seems like the other panelists might have agreed with that a little bit. But overall, good proposal. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Any additional comments or thoughts that you have that haven't been stated on this application already? And again, as DJ was mentioning earlier, we do ask the panelists to look beyond grantsmanship to the extent possible. So if the answer is not in a certain section, but it is in another section, as DJ was mentioned earlier, we do ask that the panelists take that into consideration, and you can use a response in a different area. But we also do ask them to give you feedback for future improvement and constructive criticism. So just ways to help make your application stronger in the future. With that being said, if there are no further comments from the panel, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Susan, Bailey, Georgian, and Brooks. Alrighty, thank you everyone. Our next application up for review is Ethos. Bailey and Brooks are our primary and secondary. And Bailey, whenever you're ready to begin.
Right, so Ethos is a very exciting and fun-filled applicant. Their proposed activity is going to be a child-focused interdisciplinary event that they described as a showscape dance game. So very playful, very fun. I do have just a couple little notes here and there. Let's see. So there was some moments of just like, I wish there was a little bit more clarity. I think the event proposed makes a lot of sense, but I think it was just clarity within like the key constituencies, like who exactly the focus is going to be on. I know it's focused on kids primarily, but like what is there like a certain group within that? It's very clearly open to anyone, but so just some more clarity there. Let's see. And also like history of service area. I think there was a little bit unclarity there as well. And let me scroll down here. But yeah, so I think the event proposed is very strong and really exciting, but I think in the other categories, there could have just been more overall clarity about how things are going to fit within, you know, intersectionality, how it's going to fit into Austin's community, those types of questions I still had. But yeah, overall it sounds super fun, but I did have some questions post reading through.
Great, thank you. Secondary, Brooks.
Sure. I was very impressed with just the concept of this creative project. There is support documentation, the videos, the photographs were very illustrative in terms of helping to understand this storytelling that transcends language and again, a focus on children. I would agree though that the room for improvement and clarity for me would be in how this work would directly impact key constituencies that are the priority of this grant giving experience. There also seems to be in the budget not a line item for accessibility, even though they address that in other places. So we always need to put our dollars where our mouth is, when possible, please. But otherwise, I think the explanation of what the project is was very strong. Obviously lots of history and experience with this, but matching up that, how does it bring an impact to specific key constituencies would be the most specific way to improve this for me. And again, trying, even though we have a storytelling transcends language concept, there's still signage and websites and promotions that could be enhancing non-English speakers or for other accessibility needs.
Okay, that is, thank you for that feedback. If anybody else on the panel has a divergent opinion or anything they'd like to add, please feel free to do so now. Okay, Jesus, just as a reminder, just based off of the feedback, I did want to remind the group that one of the key points of this work is about serving communities that are experiencing cultural erasure or marginalization, and people who are going through systemic or have been through systemic exclusionary practices. And so those are very critical to the entire point of these grants. And I just want to remind you that not to in any way overlook or overshadow that very primary purpose for why we're here. Jesus?
Yes, thank you. DJ, again, as our outside equity facilitator, making sure we keep equity top of mind when we are scoring and reviewing these applications. We have asked the panelists not to repeat comments that have been stated previously, but if they do have differing opinions, or even if they concur but have a thought that has not been covered by one of the other panelists. So with that being said, any additional commentary on this application? Thoughts you have that haven't been stated by others? If there are no further comments on this application, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Brooks, Bailey, Susan, and Georgian. Alrighty, thank you, everyone. Our next application up for review is Raul Bitrago. Georgian and Bailey are our primary and secondary. And Georgian, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, I did enjoy this application quite a bit. I thought it was very thorough, very clear what the artist was trying to do, and what the individual is a photographer trying to expose the Latin culture, trying to expose the Latin culture to others so they could kind of see it firsthand and understand it firsthand through photography. I thought the proposal covered our target audience, which is individuals that are immediate risk and at risk of cultural erasure or displacement. And I thought throughout the application that's shown and argued from top to bottom. I thought the applicant hit all the major areas. There was a couple things here. I want to say on accessibility is what I saw. I thought intersectionality was identified clearly. Accessibility. Proposed activities included deep and impactful adaptations of services to individuals with disabilities. However, I would like to see the use of trained professionals is what I noted in that area. Use of Braille, English, and Spanish was there for the language accessibility. Outside of that, marketing, great marketing strategy. I liked it. It was very broad, and I thought it was an adequate budget for what the artist is attempting to accomplish here.
Thank you. Any other comments, Georgian?
No, thank you.
No.
Sorry.
Okay, didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah,
secondary. Bailey.
Okay, so I agree with pretty much everything that was covered already. Strong application. One note that I had was within the section of cultural leadership. I was just a little bit confused. I know this is, coming from a photographer perspective, so it will be a little bit of a different format. But I just think there could have been a little bit more talked about how the key constituencies were being met within that experience of being that photographer. So that was a note there that I had. And then also, forgive me if this was already mentioned, but I think the intersectionality section could have just been a little bit more clarified. And then the proposed activities and the accessibilities within that, they were proposed, but I think a bit more detail about like how exactly those proposed accessibility accommodations would have been implemented within the event. But otherwise, yeah, very strong, exciting applicant.
Thank you, Bailey. Is there any other comments or from a panelist that has not been already spoken but may support or may not be in alignment with those statements?
I would just say that I would love to know more about the collaborators with whom he plans to work. that didn't deter from the application for me in any way, but I was very interested in knowing more about that because I felt it would lend some details to the project, the intersectionality, the constituents, all of those things, if it was available to share. So thanks.
Jesus?
Thank you, everyone. Any additional thoughts, comments on this panel, thoughts, or on this application, thoughts you have that have not been covered by others? Or if you have already gone, any additional thoughts that you have? Seeing as there are none, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Susan, Brooks, Bailey, and Georgian. All righty. Thank you, everyone. We will pause the recording. And we are back from break. Our next application up for review is Violet Crown Sessions. Susan has a conflict of interest with this application, so we'll have her camera turned off and her mic muted. We will invite her back once scores have been finalized for this application. So our primary and secondary for this application are Georgian and Brooks. And Georgian, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay, this is a Violent Crown, and I like the application as a collective whole. You know, the application is basically centered around individuals who created the old Austin culture. Individuals put the city of Austin on the map. Intergenerational, interracial, come as you are community that make up the Violent Crown session, Violet Crown session. I like the application. You know, they're trying to bring people together through music. It is the old Austin culture, and it's rooted in serving other forms of marginalized populations, is what I saw in it. What I like to see is a little bit more focus on the marginalized communities at exposure at risk, at exposure. They did note in here that they're planning on putting a near future event to host Spanish language artists in terms of the language ability. You know, I believe the Spanish is probably that old Austin culture as well. Like to have seen how what they have done to this point historically with that, or what they're currently doing. I did like that they did have a future thought of that, but would like to see something more for today as well. Additionally, I did like to see how they would focus on the tourist population. I did like their marketing strategy. They had tons of marketing strategies, how to reach the public for tourists through internet, through social media, newspapers, but I was curious to know how they would actually reach the Spanish-speaking audiences in that regard. And then the budget, I thought it was adequately requested. However, I like to see how they were going to kind of focus on the accessibility services, how they're going to support that. They did note in the application that there was a lot of interactive hands-on activities, creating figurines, quiet space for individuals with that may have needed some accessibility accommodations. I would just like to see how they're going to market that or fund that, budget that. So, okay, and that's all that I have.
Great, thank you. Secondary, Brooks?
Yes, I would just say that I also felt like conceptually the idea is really very interesting to bring back using music as a way to gather people together, bring people of different backgrounds, experience levels, ages, languages to this place through the music event itself. And again, centering artists and payment to artists for their work. I would agree that there needed more details around key constituencies, both in terms of directly affecting them, not just being in the neighborhood, so to speak, and involving those voices in the decision-making, that centering around cultural leadership specifically. There does seem to be a little bit of a disconnect in the romanticization of old Austin culture when we know that that was also full of other problems itself. So I would like to see more direct connections of how we're going to change specific marginalized constituencies, those in danger of erasure. There's a very broad use of the word, or very broadly defining their constituencies as the artistic community, but without diving deeper into what that might mean specifically. Yes, thanks.
All right. It's very wonderful to hear the mindfulness that is being put center stage when it comes to remembering why we're here and why there's a need for this type of grant. And so it's very encouraging to hear your statements about how you are centering your decision making on your scoring. And Jesus, I will ask you to lead us in getting more feedback
Great.
on this one.
Bailey, any thoughts that you have, since you're the only one who hasn't gone yet?
I agree with everything that's been said. I think the only note that I had within this applicant was just I made a note within the cultural leadership section. I think there was maybe just like a very small discrepancy between like the key constituencies and like how the cultural leadership was fitting within that. So maybe just like a little bit of clarity within that, but I mean they do have like clearly a lot of community experience, but just yeah, being more specific with it is the only comment I had.
Great, thank you. Any other additional comments, thoughts that you have that maybe you haven't stated already? Seeing as there are no further comments, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Bailey, Georgian? Yeah, that's fine. While Brooks is finalizing her score, Susan, if you can turn your camera back off, please. We still are finalizing scores. And so Susan does have a conflict of interest, so she will not be scoring this application. It's not like it's a score of 0 or anything. She's just not scoring this application. So just we will invite her back once Brooks has finished scoring her application. And she is ready. All right, Susan, you may come back. Thank you, everyone. We will move on to our next application, which is, let me pull it up here, a really small museum. Susan and Bailey are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Sure. So as a reminder, the Really Small Museum project is a partnership with the Trail Conservancy to construct 2 new accessible museums on the Anne and Roy Butler Trail. I felt like the application did a good job of explaining how the artist's experience in producing this kind of work and the history of working with some of the communities that are marginalized and underrepresented in Austin. They don't appear to have lived experience within these communities themselves, but I felt like they did a really good job, in the description of the project and talking about their commitment to environmental intersectionality. That was really detailed, really thorough. They are working in partnership with TSBVI, artists, scientists, Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, youth and community groups. So there's a lot of partnership going on here. So I felt like that kind of illustrated the buy-in of communities that this artist is targeting in the work. Yeah, they clearly demonstrated how the key constituencies also have benefited from their previous work. I think the actual section on intersectionality, they they don't actually go into a lot of detail about how the project involves intersectionality in the planning and development of the project. But I think other sections of the application seem to address that. I would have liked to have that spelled out a bit more, because I think there is a section somewhere in the application where they mention, a public platform to recruit artists. And so I would have liked them to elaborate more about, that process and what that involved. They talk a little bit about serving communities that are at immediate risk of cultural erasure. But I did think it was interesting that, this project was going to be installed on the Anne and Roy Butler Trail. That's a hike and bike trail. It's the center of Austin. Arguably, a lot of communities from all over the city use that space. But I think, in my mind, it might have been more effective to propose that, these really small museums be installed, in those communities where people who are at risk of erasure, cultural erasure live, which is not, central Austin. It is not 78701 or 02 even. So that was my only, I suppose you could call it, criticism of it. It's just, I thought that maybe a little bit more thought could have been put into the location of the project itself.
Thank you. Secondary, Bailey?
Yeah, so again, agreed with what has been said so far. I don't have a lot of constructive feedback within this application. I felt like there was a lot of really, really strong responses, especially within the key constituencies. It was very, very clear of who exactly this was going to be focusing on and explaining how they are affected by different things within the community. But yeah, so I overall agree on the constructive criticism that was already given. That was kind of a note that I had made as well. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a very strong application overall, with very exciting and innovative ideas for bringing representation and artwork into Austin.
Okay, thank you for that, Brooks. I am going to pick on you right now, calling on you. I'd like to encourage you to offer any feedback that you might have specifically on this particular applicant.
So I felt it was difficult to parse the priority of the project of environmentalism over constituencies of color or within these key groups in danger of erasure or who have been marginalized over time. That they were not at odds, but it was hard, even based on the documentation provided, to see, well, which are we elevating and why in which places. I agree the placement was one of those details. And so I'd like to hear more about that, again, centering of voices and where is the decision-making coming from. Obviously, a lot of this is also affected by those partnerships, which I want to uplift again. We love projects that collaborate, but are there other groups that could be part of that collaboration? Disability advocate groups or other different groups throughout the city of Boston who could also lend their expertise and maybe give a little different venue perspective on some of the choices being made. But very much appreciative of the project itself.
Okay, Jesus, if we have a little bit of time remaining on this particular one, just based off of the scoring that I'm seeing, I see we have 4 minutes. Just the diversity in scoring in this particular application. I would like to also call on the other panelists to offer their assessments, because I feel like it would be beneficial overall to our final decision making on this one. So with that, Susan, would you please weigh in on your assessment of this particular application?
So I'm listed as the primary on this one, and I
Oh,
think
I apologize.
comments. Yeah, thank you.
I apologize. I'm sorry. So we heard from Brooks. Georgian.
going through my notes here. Probably the biggest concern, just a little bit more focus on the marginalized communities for risk of a cultural erasure and displacement. I'm trying to see, everything was kind of mentioned, but I want to see if I'm sticking out here anywhere. Broad marketing strategy, would like to see how they're going to reach the tourist populations. They use multiple approaches of how to reach their audience, but specifically, how are they going to try to bring in tours more specifically? Appropriate budget requests, good proposal, good project. And that's leadership has a good cultural understanding, lots of leadership history. But again, we'd like to see a little bit more focus on that, those groups of immediate risk of displacement or cultural erasure. So that's all. Thank you.
I would like to highlight that they did do a good job of explaining additional ways to support ADA access for the museum heights and fonts, which is not often highlighted, and going sort of the extra mile and also including Braille as QR codes, and a lot of language accessibility that seems to be a priority for the organization in general.
Thank you, everyone. We have just under 2 minutes left. If there are additional thoughts or comments on this application.
Yes, just the reminder that there is environmental racism. It does exist, and it's part of the systemic racism that has been experienced by the core communities that we are here to put front of center. And I just wanted to offer that as a reminder.
Yes, thank you, TJ.
I'll also
Susan.
say that they do, sorry to just interject here, I know we have just a few minutes, but they do highlight environmental racism by talking about environmental intersectionality and how that's been core to their organization and their mission. Again, not clearly illustrated in the application how this specific project would do that, but they do at least acknowledge that history of oppression and environmental inequity.
Thank you. 49 seconds left. Any final thoughts or comments on this application? Thoughts that you have that haven't been stated already, either by yourself or by others? If there are no additional comments, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Brooks, Susan, Bailey, and Georgian. Thank you, everyone. Our next application up for review is Pool Boy 00. Brooks and Susan are our primary and secondary, and Brooks, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay, so Pool Boy has a proposal to do a live event with microphone-based micro workshops and performances in collaboration with the Museum of Human Achievement. Multifaceted in that there's a live version, a streamed version, and then also a video capture of it as well. Deeply rooted in queer culture, queer identity. This is something that this particular artist had started during pandemic and has expanded in terms of how they've done performances online, have a channel online, and now is extending this to a day-long immersive performance. I think based on the samples that they included and the explanations of this artist's commitment to their own identity and the community, it's very clear how this aligns with the priorities of this grant, and that they continue to sort of dig into that lived experience to derive the programming. I'd love to know more about their collaborators in the bios that they put in, because as we've stated before, there's always so much more texture that we can gain from those details if you're able to include them. I think that, again, micro workshops are described fairly generally. I would like to have a little more detail about what each workshop would look like. But also, I think that their explanation of the cultural activity really demonstrates their experience with the complexity of and impact of intersectionality. I would love to see like a further, how does this impact the content or the structure of the event, their knowledge of those things, which I felt were well explained, the intersectionality itself. I did think that for the ADA access, they would benefit from some trained professionals assessing needs as well. Language accessibility, very well thought out and explained. Also supported by the multi-platform version of this event as well. Marketing, it just had a question as to whether there was a way to start to reach visitors to Austin as well as the residents, which is also one of the priorities here. Budget, it seems reasonably thought out, but wanted some more ideas or details around the equipment rental and what that really would look like. It was sort of generally explained. But yes, and I think it's a really unique project that we haven't seen come up before.
Thank you. I will say before we move on to the secondary that if applicants are awarded funding, one of their requirements is that they post their events to visit Austin, and that is through the Austin Convention and Visitors Bureau, so it does reach tourists. I mentioned that since hotel occupancy tax is the source of our funding. But with that being said, also one of the responses in the marketing question should be explicitly how one markets to tourists, so that so just keep both of those in mind, that the answer should respond to how they address tourists, but also we do allow them, just so we're in compliance with the hotel occupancy tax, we do require them to post their events on Visit Austin. With that being said, secondary, Susan?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what has been said. I think, just to not reiterate a lot of that, one of the things I appreciated about the application was that, they speak a lot about, their lived experience as a person who identifies as queer, and that their work, centers the queer community, and their project highlights questions of identity. But I appreciated that they also specifically mentioned, older adults, engaging older adults in the project, and people with language barriers, as was mentioned, the accessibility in terms of language access was, I thought, very strong. Not so much on other types of accessibility, physical, or how trained professionals would necessarily be involved in facilitating the project. I had a comment here earlier that I thought it was unclear how communities, that they sought to engage would be involved in the development and design of the project. But then I found, later on in revisiting this application and scrolling down, they sort of talk about that in the intersectionality section of the application, where they talk about how they'll prioritize stories and experiences of people who are often marginalized and silenced. I perhaps would have liked to hear them, speak more about, again, which communities this project would serve in that section, just to tie it all together. But it's sort of, since we're not focusing so much on grantsmanship here, it is in the application, that content is in the application. It would have been easier for me to get to that realization sooner if it was all in one place. Apart from that, I thought the participatory engagement of the project that they speak about in the project seemed very, very interesting. And as was mentioned, a unique project. I would like to go to the tent. And that's all I have.
Are there any other panelists that would like to offer either a differing opinion or an opinion that has not otherwise been expressed on this particular application? Okay, so before we move on, and this is not directed at any particular applicant that we may or may not have discussed so far, but I do want to offer to the panelists to be reflective in front of mind that diversity, equity, and inclusion are not necessarily the same thing, and you can have one without having the other quite easily. So inclusion does not necessarily equal equity, and diversity does not necessarily equal inclusion. So please keep that in mind as we move forward. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jesus.
Thank you for the equity reminders, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of those. So thank you for that, DJ. I will say, as Susan was mentioning, we do ask the panelists to look beyond grantsmanship to the extent that they can. So if they do find the information in the application just in a different section, they can use that in scoring, but we are also encouraging them to provide feedback for future improvement. And I think someone also earlier maybe mentioned something kind of comparing this application to another, and sometimes panelists will do that just to, draw a point of comparison, but the panelists are not comparing applications when they're scoring. They are just scoring each application individually based on how it meets the review criteria. With that being said, we have just over a minute and a half left on this application. Any final thoughts that you have that haven't been stated already? Seeing as there are none, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Brooks, Georgian, Susan, and Bailey. Thanks, everyone. All right, our next application up for review is Burden of Legacy. Bailey and Brooks are our primary and secondary, and Bailey, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, so just as an overview, Burden of Legacy, their proposed event is a launch party for a book that they are publishing. And that will include having a staged reading, a panel, work from local artists, and their key constituencies are the BIPOC community, and within that, visual performance and artists in all audiences within that. Overall, very strong applicant. I think I'm very invested in their ideas with their book. Let's see, one note that I had is since I feel like I didn't understand completely what the book was focusing on, I had a little bit of a question whether bringing in or representing underrepresented communities was at the core of the founding, because the founding, I guess, would be the book publishing, which I believe it is, because there's a portion where it was explaining that the book that briefly talks about the book being discussing the idea of like anti-binary thinking. So my understanding that it is within the core founding of the project, but that was really one of the main notes I had. Everything's pretty clear otherwise about how the event will be accessible, what the event communities that are focused on is all very clear. So yeah, I think it was just that one thing that I was just a little bit unsure about, whether they were truly that was truly part of the founding, or if it was more so like the event is focusing on that, but I'm not sure if the book was. But that was the only question I had. Otherwise, like very strong, very exciting activities.
Thank you. Secondary, Brooks.
I would also say I'm so excited about this project, and I have to thank the applicant for introducing me to the term blurred. I'm so just wildly excited about this Black nerd culture and all of the things that can center around it. I think that the previous work that they've done too, which has been rooted in the science fiction writing, specifically centering sort of marginalized folks in as their protagonists, along with the event. It's really, really fun, dynamic things. For me, it could be enhanced with, again, some short bios on each of the creative team leadership. I'd like to see a little bit more about them. It also feels like, you know, as we're talking about those artist showcases and the audience that might be in attendance of those, I would also like to see some details on that. But yes, I think just the intersectionality, for me, this is one of the best examples of explicitly showing intersectionality as opposed to just saying these groups. There are clear crossovers and the impact of what will happen when those groups come together. So I'm very appreciative of the explanations given to this application.
Okay, is there any additional feedback from the other panelists that may differ or offer a different perspective? If not, I will turn it over to you, Jesus.
Thank you, everyone. Again, I'll give you time to collect your thoughts. If you have any additional thoughts, even if you are in agreement with what has been said, if you have a thought that has not been stated by one of the other panelists. Seeing as there are no other comments on this application, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Brooks, Georgian, Susan, and Bailey. Alrighty, thanks everyone. Our next application up for review is Fathom of Women and Water. Georgian and Bailey are our primary and secondary. And Georgian, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, this application is an application on theater works, including musical plays and operas. The applicants are putting on plays throughout the year of various forms for our target audiences. I thought the application was strong all the way across. I'm going to start with the leadership. I think that might be their strongest point in the sense that they were multifaceted, all had various backgrounds, and then they used their backgrounds into the proposal throughout the proposal. I thought they're sharing their passions individually, and you can see that through every one of the categories as they're trying to explain what they're going to do and what they wanted to do, lifting the voices of the unseen. So I thought the leadership was good. I thought that they showed a history, using again their leadership of where they have been and where they want to go. I think they used that. I think they explained it well. I think the intersectionality was hit with the Blacks, mixed race, Native Americans, white, non-binary, lesbians. I think they covered the spectrum there. I thought they had a good marketing strategy. I would like to know how they're going to reach non-English audience. They had numerous outlets mentioned, Visit Austin 365, Austin Chronicle, Do 512, and some radio stations in there. But how are they actually going to, focus on the Spanish-speaking audience? But really enjoyed the application. It seemed like they really put it together well, really explained everything well, and it was thorough. So thank you.
Thank you. Secondary, Bailey?
So I do agree with everything that has been already discussed, but I do have one different opinion that I believe the cultural leadership response actually maybe was not as strong in my opinion. It was just like a little bit unclear of what communities exactly were being served through their list of prior leadership. Like it's very clear that they have done a lot of really great community events and experiences. I think I just wanted more clarification of like with these events that are being listed, how were their key constituencies met within them? Because there just wasn't a ton of like deep diving of explanation into what these events were. Mostly just kind of more like a listed format. But otherwise, yeah, I really enjoy this applicant, and what was said already was very applicable.
Jesus, if you will just give me one moment, I am
Sure, I see Brooks has a comment or had her hand raised.
sure.
I was just going to mention that I felt like they did provide some very solid examples of both their history within the constituents and that cultural leadership, but that one of the challenges for me was what's the consistency of that when we're talking about this history, that they seem to have a long, broad history of work, and to show maybe 3 examples felt like, is this the extent of things, or have we cherry picked the ones that are best for this grant to highlight? So that would be the only thing to ask, is there a way to explain that differently that would make me understand, yes, more of the depth of that.
Susan, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Not really beyond what's already been said. I was just looking back over my notes here because I do note, I have a note here about marketing that I need to pick out, because I think that it doesn't reach as many of the audiences as, you know, we've asked people to reach out to. So that includes tourists, people with disabilities. I think that looking at the marketing, I want to see who sort of missing from that description. And it might have been tourists. Nope, there's tourists. Sorry, please be patient with me. Yeah, I think it was people with disabilities that weren't really mentioned much in the marketing strategy, which is why I didn't include them in my score for marketing.
I did just want to commend them also for really centering the payment of artists in this budget, that these are real fees and not here's your $50. So I very much appreciate listing out per performer how much the wages would really be, and the directors and co-producers. So thank you for those details.
Anyone else? Okay, great feedback. And with that, Jesus?
Thank you, everyone. If there are no additional thoughts or comments, anything you have that hasn't been stated or that you'd wanted to state but haven't had, you just found your notes. If there are no further comments on this application, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Bailey, Brooks, and Georgian, and Susan. Thank you, everyone. Our next application up for review is At a Place. Susan and Georgian are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay. So At a Place, as a reminder, is a project centered around an album release party in collaboration with Recovery Unplugged to raise awareness about addiction and mental health. The applicant themselves identifies as a person who is has a history of addiction, is in recovery, and speaks about the ways that the message of recovery is incorporated into their music. And so I thought of that as a community that maybe isn't at immediate risk of cultural erasure, but that has potentially been marginalized in the past. So they're not specific about, one of the things I noted is that they're not really specific about the communities that would be involved and are served by the project beyond the broader recovery community, which they speak about, being a very diverse community. And, it's just unclear where the opportunity creation is there. So it's not very descriptive in that regard. But Yeah, in the intersectionality section, they state that there is diversity. So to elaborate on that comment about the broadness of the language, that there's diversity in the recovery community, but it's unclear how intersectionality would be incorporated into the proposed activities. They anticipate that the spirit of non-inclusion in the recovery community will be carried into the project, but they themselves are the sole decision maker. They're the one person who is overseeing this project. And so it would have helped, I think, the application for them to spell out how they would go about making those decisions on who to include in the project, and how they aim to represent that, those different groups and potentially like marginalized and underserved voices in their project. Ultimately, that's their responsibility. Also, I put that because the funds are specifically supposed to facilitate equity in the arts, I just found that the connection between the proposed project and the objectives of this grant were sometimes unclear. I have notes about accessibility. It could have been more detailed for sure. They write about consulting with somebody. They do admit that they have a lot of learning to do with respect to how to make the event both physically, environmentally accessible to people, but also in terms of language. But I think a little bit more pre-planning, a bit of research, reaching out to people ahead of putting together the application so that the response could be, I want to become educated about this. I am going to involve these groups or provide these types of supports or accommodations for people, versus saying I'm going to consult with someone. So again, it was sort of nondescript. But overall, I think like it's an important message, right? The message of recovery and overcoming addiction. And so bringing together, people in this community, I think is necessary, but maybe not necessarily a good fit for this specific grant.
Thank you. Secondary, Georgian?
I'm just going to agree with everything that she said there. I think she assessed it well. Additional comments that I have, I do believe it's a worthwhile program. I think Susan mentions that. When I read the application, I thought it was a great program or application. But I think she hits it on the head at the very end there, that it's probably just needs to be focused into another grant. There are areas that they kind of need to work on a little bit for the application itself. They did note that they're willing to supply accommodations when needed, or as needed, and kind of mention those in there. But I'd like to see a little bit more focus on, what are they going to do, or how are they going to pull that off. Would like to have seen the use of trained professionals for the language communications. And then I'd like to have seen how they're going to market to marginalized populations and the tourist populations as well. Yeah, I thought the program was a great program, but probably more focus, more attention onto marginalized population, not just kind of they seemed to be rooted in their own program, which was alcohol, mental health, and so I like the application, but just maybe somewhere else, maybe where it needs to go. That's all. Thank you.
All right, Georgian, thank you so much. With that, panelists, if there is anyone who has a different perspective or would like to add to the commentary that's already been expressed, please do so now.
I also just wanted more information on if the event was going to be fee-based or not, like if there was an attempt to enter it, and if so, where those dollars would go in the end. Additionally, how the activities and services provided at this event would extend beyond what their partnership organization was already providing.
And if so, anyone else have any feedback? This is a great time when you all come together, the panelists come together to share their differing perspectives, because if you had any lingering questions or doubts in the back of your mind based on how you initially scored, It's a great opportunity to address that now in this setting. And with that, Jesus.
Thank you, DJ. Thank you, everyone. If there are no additional comments, thoughts that you have that haven't been stated by anyone else already? If not, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Brooks, Georgian, Bailey, and Susan. Alrighty, thank you, everyone. We will pause the recording. And we are back from lunch. I am Jesus Pantel, the Cultural Funding Supervisor in the City of Austin Economic Development Department's Cultural Arts Division. We have DJ Lazada today here as our outside equity facilitator, helping to make sure that both city staff as well as the review panelists keep equity in mind when reviewing these applications. The panelists have reviewed and scored and commented on all of provided written comments on all the applications prior to today. They will be verbally discussing them. They may change their scores based on the feedback provided by their fellow panelists, but they are not required to do so. They are not scoring on consensus, so panelists may have different takes on an application, and that is fine. We brought them on board for their various perspectives and points of view and areas of knowledge. We have asked the panelists not to repeat anything that has been stated previously by another panelist. They can concur or have a similar opinion, but if you don't hear any additional commentary, they're in agreement with what has already been stated by their fellow panelists. We've asked the panelists to look beyond grantsmanship to the extent possible. So if they have to, maybe search around to find information in the application, but it is in there, they should score, even if it's in a different section. They should score as if it answered the question. They may make comments on that, but we are asking them to look beyond grantsmanship to the extent that they can. At the end of the day, though, the information does need to be there in the application for them to score accordingly. We will be having a 10-minute maximum application time for each, or review time for each application. I will be timing it. If we have any kind of technical difficulties, I will pause the timers so that way the application gets the full 10 minutes that it is allotted. And with that being said, I think we are ready to continue our reviews. Our next application up for review is paper chairs. Primary and secondary are Susan and Bailey. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay. So Paper Chairs, this project is a theater project that we'll put on a show called Once Upon a Blood Wedding, which is a queer reimagining of Lorca's Blood Wedding. And so I felt from the get-go, this application, it was very clear that, the organization itself, is rooted in serving key constituencies that Elevate Grant is, seeking to assist with this funding. And so they're rooted in serving those communities that are at immediate risk of cultural erasure. I also felt that they did a great job of explaining, their mission, their vision, their history as well. They give a really good, robust description of their past projects. And in addition to that, how those projects contribute to the mission of centering and amplifying marginalized voices. So I thought that those were some of the really key strengths of the organization, but also the project specifically, which I think, is important. You can talk all day about the organization and what it does, but what will this project do to address those criteria? And so I think they did a good job of that. And they also speak about different opportunity creation in terms of jobs, amplifying key voices, educating. And then there's also some notes about mentorship as well. So they talk about hiring people who are queer or identify as BIPOC or represent those key constituencies, and giving opportunities to work alongside people who have a wealth of experience in theater production. Also, one of the things I felt like there could have been more detail on was the cultural leadership answer. So it doesn't really describe who the executive team or advisors or board of directors are, or how they represent those key constituencies. I mean, they speak a lot about how their work is driven by people that they seek to represent and amplify the voices of, but it wasn't really divulged clearly, explicitly who the decision makers are in that process and who to include. The intersectionality response was very strong. The only other, what I would call weakness in the application was just that in terms of accessibility, they don't really describe how trained professionals would be involved in carrying out this project. But apart from that, I felt like it was very, very strong.
Thank you. Secondary, Bailey?
Yes, so let's see. I agree with everything so far. A note that I want to make about the key constituencies is they are clear that they are focusing on a at-risk community, but the only thing that was a discrepancy for me is they weren't really focusing on the Austin specific community. Like that wasn't really something that they mentioned within the key constituencies. So I think, I mean, they mentioned it in one part, but I think I just wanted more like explanation and research into that specific, the LGBTQIA community within Austin, not just kind of as like abroad. And then I do really appreciate in the accessibility portion that not only were they considering the accessibility for attendees for the theater event, but also their cast and crew and accessibility for them as well. So I thought that was strong. I do agree with the point made about the professionals though. And let's see. They also had a really great advertisement section, like that was extremely clear and concise of how they're going to be advertising the event, the marketing section. But yeah, overall, I mean, really strong application. It was just a couple little notes here and there. One more thing I also appreciated is that you know, a bulk of the budget is going to their artist, and that they also didn't have some type of like hierarchy within their performers. It's just, you know, this one set payment for all of the artists that are participating. So I thought that was nice as well. But yeah, overall, very strong.
Okay, thank you so much for the feedback. Are there any other panelists that would like to offer their assessment, differing or complementary to what's already been said? Georgia?
I agree with the two panelists there completely all the way through. The only other thing on there is I'd like to have seen production costs in the budget equation. That's all. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I would chime in. So I guess I had a different perspective on their key constituencies and how they were serving these folks or involving them. When looking at the materials they provided and the previous projects they've done, I did not see the alignment with what they had stated in their paragraphs about who they're serving and how they're centering those voices. Garcia Lorca is not from South America, from this continent. He is European, from Spain. And so the perspective of being LGBTQIA resonates well with our program, but the idea that just because we share language with different people due to colonization is not necessarily the reflection of those values within the key constituencies of Austin. So I think for me, for those to line up, I would need more details about the Garcia Lorca project reimagined and how it, as Bailey mentioned, really lines up for Austin specifically, as opposed to just the broader context of it. There did seem to be a lot of support for language, though, which I'd like to highlight. That they were talking about bilingual productions and subtitles, which is a pretty extensive undertaking and to be commended for sure.
Okay. Anyone else? One of the questions that I had based off of the feedback that I would like to pose to the panelists is, how does one get to equity, inclusion, and belonging without a defined core constituency, in your opinion? How does that translate in alignment with how you viewed this particular application? Because I heard more than one of you, I think, say that you were missing that piece.
Felt like they did a good job of explaining who their key constituencies were in the application. I take the other panelists' point about maybe that not aligning with what is available on their website and their about section. I hadn't thought to look at that, and I'm reviewing that now and seeing the validity of that. But I do think in the application, they do name specific key constituencies that they aim to work with and amplify voices of and include. And so I think in terms of equity, for sure, amplifying voices. I think that's super duper important representation, very important political representation as well, in terms of like decision making around what the queering or reimagining of historical texts could look like through a different lens. So I felt like that was very strong. But again, my point about who is actually making the decisions, the cultural leadership of the organization, that to me is still pretty unclear.
I know that we have just a few seconds left, but I do want to remind you that for the purposes of this particular grant, Austin and the surrounding area is our focus, our main focus, and marginalization and erasure of cultures who have been have history of erasure of those things happening to them is at the forefront of this particular grant. And I'd like for you guys to, just as a reminder, to keep that front of mind. And with that, Jesus?
We have just under 30 seconds left. Thank you for that reminder about equity, DJ. Any additional comments with about 20 seconds left in this review? Thoughts you have that have not been stated already? Brooks, 8 seconds, and you're muted.
Just that the budget that shows there's already funding from a different campaign was also hard to understand how that would be parsed between them.
That is time. Thank you. And so hopefully everybody heard that. We are at time, so if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Susan, Bailey, Georgian, and Brooks. Thank you, everyone. We will move on to our next application, which is Amy Bench. Brooks and Georgian are our primary and secondary, and Brooks, whenever you're ready to begin.
Great. Amy Bench is a filmmaker. There are some existing projects that she's looking to continue working on and expand into public discussion. So one project called Breaking Silence that is in existence, that is trying to expand in collaboration with another organization, having a public screening, and then a film called Sharifa that is an animated film and continuing to be in the creative process in sort of tandem with this. So I think things that stood out for me was the sort of level of commitment this person has to these two artists, or to the animators with whom she is working, the artists, and that they have a lot of experience in making high quality films that get a lot of accolades. It definitely focuses on the disability community, as well as some of our key constituencies in terms of communities that are in danger of erasure. I think their documentation supports the statements they were making, and there is some history of support and involvement in these communities, but it also seems as though that was not the sole purpose of this filmmaker. That is not sort of core to their filmmaking process, more to a certain set of projects that they are now working on. I think breaking silence of the projects they noted and the one that will be funded by or would be funded by this has the strongest past evidence of being rooted in the community, getting input from the community, collaboration with another organization as well. There is collaboration in the leadership, their cultural leadership. I thought they demonstrated well what they are working together on, but I would like more details on how the decision-making itself actually happens, that it felt unclear as to the final decision makers or how you would weigh different opinions. In general, it's a really interesting project. Just more details on those intersectionalities and the actual impact on communities that are being centered in the work.
Thank you. Secondary, Georgian?
I agree with everything she noted there. Yeah, I like the application. Yeah, I like the history that they have put on shows. One things couple of things here I want to note is one on the history of putting on shows. No, it's not a requirement or anything, but I did like that they were the artist here, the applicant here, was using this film or previous film in 2022, More Than I Want to Remember, to help raise $3,000 for another fund, another organization, and then that they put on it was a free outdoor population event. So I like that they're giving back to the community. I see that. I just want to note that. In terms of other ideas, other thoughts, in the budget, I would like to see the production costs. I think that was overlooked in that application. And then just a final thought, just notes that I put, the very thought, I thought it was an excellent and exciting application, well developed throughout is one of the things I noted. And I think it was Brooks had explained it well there. So thank you.
Feedback from other panelists, either agreeing or adding to, yes, Bailey.
I just have a quick note about their marketing section. The one thing that I think could be a good addition in that is it seems like they don't really have a method of reaching communities in Austin that are maybe outside of their kind of targeted communities. Like they have a lot of marketing towards Austin deaf communities and also like film communities within Austin, but not really kind of outside communities also within Austin. I mean, they are advertising to like people outside of Texas and beyond, but I think that could be something to elevate their marketing section. That was the only little comment I had.
If there's still time, I have just another note about the budget. I noted that some of the amounts in the budget description don't always add up to the total, and that payments to artists line lumps in producer and co-producer fees. So production costs are in there, but they're maybe just in the wrong space. So just a little bit of tweaking to the budget would strengthen, I think, this application.
Anyone else? All right, Jesus.
Thank you. Any additional comments, thoughts that you have that haven't been covered already? I will say, just for the giving back to the community part, we do state that fundraisers are not allowed. But if someone uses funds, however they use their funds, if they charge admission, it can go back to themselves, to their organization. If they do want to give funds to others, they just cannot market it or, tout it as a fundraising event. But if they use those funds for something else. So just keep that in mind as you're scoring the application. That is something we specifically tell our applicants. And then if they do enter into contract or score high enough to receive funding, it's something we'll go over before we enter into the grant paperwork. So with all that being said, don't know if that gave you any time, if you have any other thoughts or comments that haven't been raised already that you wanted to add. And if not, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Brooks and Susan, Bailey, and Georgian. Thank you, everyone. Our next application up for review is the Austin Belly Dance Convention. Bailey and Brooks are our primary and secondary, and Bailey, whenever you're ready to begin.
All right, so just quick overview. So their proposed event is a 3-day public belly dancing convention. Their main goal is to foster cultural appreciation, excuse me, and ensuring that marginalized voices are prioritized and celebrated is like a very clear top priority for their proposed event. So their key constituencies are Austin-based Middle Eastern communities, and then those who are also possibly non-Middle Eastern communities who are then going to be engaging with the dance from an array of various backgrounds, any backgrounds within the Austin community. Overall, I thought that they were a very strong and very clear applicant in most of the submission categories. One thing, Lily, the only thing I made a note about that I was a little bit unsure about is within the, let's see, the part in the rubric talking about tokenism or cultural appropriation was something that I just wanted to be made aware of, but I don't think it's really much of a concern for me because it seems like a lot of their community and the people who are facilitating the events are from those communities, and they seem to be very clear that they're very what's a good word for it? Very focused on serving those communities in an untokenized way. But yeah, I don't really have a ton of other critical marks. That was just something that was in my head when reviewing the proposed activities. Everything was very clearly laid out. Everything really made a lot of sense. But yeah, that's, I think, all I have for this one.
Great, thank you. Brooks?
Yeah, I would add that this seems like a very large scale event that has been well attended, has a good history within the Austin community, lots of opportunities for people within key constituencies to both be highlighted and engage with this content. I think one concern I have, though, is that it feels, particularly in cultural leadership, that the details they provide are vague. They consistently use the term Middle Eastern dance community and not Middle Eastern community. And when I try to research more on the 3 names that are in this, specifically labeled, it is unclear as to whether or not these folks have lived experiences within the constituency groups. And so I would love for more details on that to be able to parse out what's happening. And it's also not clear in terms of decision making how much these individuals who have been running the convention for some time have advisory boards that really influence both the content and sort of the engagement and programming.
Okay, other
Sorry.
feedback?
Yes, I do have some, just a little bit, but yes, agree definitely with the last comment specifically. I was going to bring that up if nobody else did. And then just a small note here about the marketing. And they do a great job of organizing this application, so very easy to follow, but didn't see any notes on marketing to new audiences. It's just the only other note I would add in addition to what's been said.
Any other feedback? Okay, so as I sit here as I was in your shoes last year as a panelist, and I would not be doing what I think is a good job at this important work if I didn't question on some level, not about a particular application, but just generally. In some of the comments I'm hearing, I didn't see this, I wish there was more of this, and yet I'm seeing perfect scores. And I'm not, I'd like to explore a little bit deeper, or ask the, you know, us as a group to explore a little bit deeper as you're making these assessments. There's a disconnect for me if you're not seeing, you're saying, I'm not seeing this, I'm not seeing that, or I agree with this panelist when they say these things and it's maybe not as glowing, and then your score is perfect. How does that work? And I just want to put that out there generically, not for a specific score or a specific applicant, but as panelists, please, please, please understand that your work, you know, center the work. You may love the project, it may be well written, but a well written grant application doesn't mean that it's necessarily meeting the criteria, or in reverse, one that is not written as well may be perfect for what the grant is doing. And that's what we mean by you don't have to just judge based on the grant. Okay. Jesus, please jump in at this point. No.
Do I have 10 seconds to ask a question about budget? They
Yes.
wrote under payment to admin support, there's a in-kind $2,000 listing, and it, 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, that equal a total of 4,000. And in my experience, in-kind implies there's no cash exchanging. So for me, that was a inconsistent part of this application. That would mean really the total dollars was 28,000 and not 30,000 that they were requesting.
Yes, thank you for that. To what DJ was saying, yes, looking beyond grantsmanship is kind of what she's saying, or what she was getting at. So whether the information is in the application or in a different place, we do want you to give that constructive criticism and feedback for future improvement, but also your comments aligning with your scores. As far as the budget, if they do score high enough to receive funding, we will work with them before we enter into the contract paperwork to make sure, the budget aligns. They may also not get the full amount that they requested. And so, if they do get a smaller amount, but still get funding, we'll work with them. So definitely something that we will do. But good note that in-kind is usually, it's not part of the city award. Also, there is no matching requirement for this. So if they do have any excess, which in this case they don't, but they can put information like that. So like the in-kind, for instance, in the budget, just talk about it in the column C, that right-hand column there. So we've got about 2.5 minutes, just under. Any additional comments or thoughts on this application? Differing opinions from what has been stated, or a note or thought that you have that hasn't been stated by anyone else? Seeing as there are no additional comments, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Brooks, Susan, Bailey, and Georgian. Thank you, everyone. All right, our next application up for review is the 1-2C. Georgian and Bailey are our primary and secondary. And Georgian, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, on this one, this is a hip hop musician that attended the School of Blind and Visually Impaired for the visually impaired. He basically wants to help out other musicians by putting together battle rap events throughout Texas. I thought the application was a good application. He has a history of putting on previous events. for rappers, for the blind, and for Black artists. I think the accessibility was clearly defined. I did like that he did say that he's not only identify how he's going to use professionals, but to actually identify who he's going to use, 3 bridges or dovetail. And so he's kind of very clear on that. The language, setting up I like that he noted that he's putting on a future performance with a Latin musician and that would sing to the Spanish-speaking community. So he does note that he's trying to reach out to the Spanish audiences. However, I'd like to see how he's going to reach those audiences ahead of time through marketing. How's he going to reach out to them? Also, how would he actually reach out to tourists? I did not see that. And then in the budget, again, I'd like to see the production fees. And then he did kind of note quite a bit on the accessibility. Would like to know the cost for the accessibility services as well. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Secondary?
I agree so far with everything that's been discussed. I have a couple of feedback notes. Overall, strong application, but I do have some things that I just wish were a bit more clear and concise. One being the cultural leadership portion. They talk a lot about their own experiences, but they don't touch a lot on how they represented their key constituencies in that portion through their experience. I feel like it just was kind of missing the second portion of that. And then also, I feel like their proposed public activity felt a bit needing some more like important details. I mean, they explained that they're wanting to have an album release party, but I just kind of want more clarification of like what is going to be happening within that event and how it's all going to play out. And it's just, there's a couple questions I think that are important to the events happenings that could be included within there. And then one last note that I have is the intersectionality portion. Similarly to some of the other categories, I feel like a lot of their responses were very like inward focusing, which I feel like sometimes some of these responses I would like to have seen more like outward focused on those communities. And so I think that in that intersectionality portion, they could have explained a little bit more about it relating to the proposed event, less so kind of more like a personalized background relating to that. Yeah, otherwise, exciting application, but those are just a couple of notes that I have.
Any other panelists want to share a differing or other opinion that may not have otherwise been expressed?
Yes. So I think, as was mentioned, it's sort of unclear what the potential impact of the project will be beyond, helping this person have their album release party, and that, they do express that it would help to shine a light on blind rappers and musicians in Austin. But beyond that, it's unclear what the opportunity creation will be also beyond that for key constituencies. So beyond shining a light on, which I use that language because that's the language used in the application. So that was, important to me to make note of. And then also going to the budget, some of the breakdown of expenses and the budget line items don't add up correctly. Not that that's a deal breaker, as Jesus mentioned, but just something to keep in mind for future proposal writing.
Anyone else?
I will offer a bit of a point about clarification, and while others are thinking if they have any additional comments to share. For the tourism in the marketing, they did mention that they would do like a social outreach to, I forget the cities, it was like Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio or something like that. So there is that information in there. However, it was, I think maybe what the panelist was trying to say, let me not put words in other people's mouth, but if it was a comment about maybe more how they plan on doing that, more specificity other than just social media into those cities. But I do want to say that they did have some outreach to cities outside of Austin. I think they also said something about reaching out to blind people. I was looking at it a few minutes ago. So and then the other thing is, if they are awarded funding, we do mandate that all of our funding recipients post their event to Visit Austin, which is a website through the Austin Convention and Visitors Bureau. So we'll definitely reach tourists that way. And I mentioned that just because hotel occupancy tax is the source of our funding, which means that the events have to be open to tourists as well as the general public. With that being said, any additional comments or thoughts on this application? If there are no further comments, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Susan, Brooks, Bailey. And Georgian. All right, thank you, everyone. Our next application up for review is Dope Reina Presents Juntos. Susan and Georgian are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, so as a reminder, this project proposes to put on a series of block parties or juntos to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month in October. And I think, some of the strengths of this application is that the applicant has lived experience, describes how their project aims to elevate representation of her intersectional identity as both queer and Hispanic in the music community. And so, elevating those voices through cultural recognition. Also, they speak clearly about opportunity creation in terms of jobs that will be generated by the funding of this project. And they do a good job of centering the importance of representation of their own identity. However, I felt that the intersectionality response itself seemed too brief and really focused on their history of event production rather than the ways that intersectionality would be incorporated into the activities. So again, maybe focusing very much on their identity and how that becomes represented through the event, but it's unclear how they will work with other groups to put on the juntos, the community involvement in that with their key constituencies and decision making. And equity is definitely a key consideration. The project will benefit those key constituencies, but again, it's kind of unclear how they aim to integrate equity into the project. So it could be, it could result from the project, but it's not very clearly outlined or discussed in the application. And I think one of the other comments I have here is that the accessibility response is somewhat vague. And then I put C notes. So here I am going to see the notes. Okay, so I wrote that, although some language access is described in the response and will be provided by a trained professional, there's very little discussion of the ways that this event would be made accessible to people with disabilities. So language accessibility, that response seemed adequate, good. Also, I've been noting this a lot, so marketing isn't targeting new audiences specifically, so wasn't able to award full points for that either. And that's all the comments I have.
Thank you. Secondary, Georgian?
Yeah, I like the application. I thought it was a good application. I think Brooke did a good job there of hitting everything. The two real issues for me, and Brooke him at the very end, but it's just the accessibility. They mention ASL interpreters, I see that as a language, not necessarily accessibility. So maybe that kind of covers into the language area. And so, you know, as Brooke noted, it is weak in that area. And so that was one of the big things with me. And then the marketing, as was just noted. So everything else I thought was okay. It is hitting the target marginalized communities. There were some marketing opportunities out there, and I think they're hitting them. Or you know, the advertisements getting the information out. But it's a good application, you know, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Any other feedback from other panelists? Brooks? Oh,
I agree
and
with
then
lots of things that have been said. I would highlight that I felt as though they did say that they were going to try to reach new audiences with their marketing, specifically a line talking about as a DJ, they can be at events, so they're attracting new audiences within Latino, Black, and Brown communities. I would agree that it feels like more attention needs to be paid to ADA access for outdoor events is very tricky, and terrain and all of that sort of thing, and height of stages and things like that. But yeah, overall, a very strong application.
Bailey?
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in and say that the only thing that I wanted to add was just looking at the cultural leadership portion. I know many people are kind of saying there was just some little bits and pieces that were unclear, but within this specific section, I feel like it just wasn't answered fully. Like I feel like they could have just talked a bit more about how their experience, like it was just another one of those things where it felt very like their inward personal experiences, and I just want to see more of like how that kind of goes outward into the communities and how that could be explained better. That was my only note.
Thank you, everyone. I believe everybody has gone now, but any additional thoughts or comments, either differing opinions or a thought you have that hasn't been covered by anyone else yet? And I always give the panelists a little bit of time just to think if anything comes up for them. But if there are no further comments on this application, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Brooks, Bailey, and Susan, and Georgia. Alrighty, thanks everyone. Our next application up for review is 2025 25th Annual Dragon Boat Festival and Race. Susan and Brooks are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, I have to open this one. Apologies.
Sure, no problem. And that 10-minute timing will start whenever Susan starts giving her commentary.
Okay, so this project is to fund the Dragon Boat Festival celebration of Asian American culture at Festival Beach. And, you know, there were a lot of strengths to this application that I want to highlight. You know, good descriptions of opportunity creation through the festival, through their organization as well. Particularly language classes that they offer, opportunities to participate in different community classes. And so I see the event, you know, the way it's described here, as sort of a way to introduce people to the organization and link them up with other services that the organization provides. The event itself, you know, I felt like, you know, equity is a consideration, but it's not fully integrated into or represented by the proposal. They note, you know, that the events are free and held on the east side, albeit next to, you know, Lady Bird Lake. But the events are free and held on the east side. They want to remove barriers to participation. So they talk about that a little bit in their proposal, which I thought was good. But, you know, in terms of inclusion and equity, those principles aren't really clearly articulated in the project narrative. Also, I felt like the cultural leadership response was somewhat vague. Oh, and it says C notes here. Sorry, I'm going to do that again to myself. Yeah, so I felt like the response doesn't really address the two questions in the prompt, and it seemed to be more of a continuation of the history of the organization, which is very impressive. And rather than a description of the organization's leadership in particular, although I felt like it could be inferred from some of the other responses, that the leadership represents the key constituencies that they seek to serve. And they also talk about this to some extent in their intersectionality section, or in the intersectionality section, I should say. Again, the event, I've been to this event before. It's really, really fun, very lively, a great day out. I think, overall, the application, it does a great job of telling the story of the organization, not necessarily how the event is going to have an impact on those key constituencies beyond connecting them with the organization. I think also one note about language accessibility, their answer, it mentions that the event will introduce audiences to different Asian languages, but it's not really clear on the language accessibility of the event in particular. And I think those were all of my comments for this application.
Great, thank you. Secondary, Brooks?
Yeah, I really love the diversity that this highlights within the Asian and Asian American communities. I think that's something that does not often get talked about, is just the wide variety of cultures, languages, practices within this. So that was a very big strength to me, and didn't highlight that in order to be able to go through all those different iterations and details, nuances, they had to be in conversation with people with lived experiences within communities of these constituencies. I think that I agree that particularly in the leadership sections, it feels like I had to infer a lot from other answers that were given, looking back at examples to understand exactly what was happening. I love the multilingual approach, but I felt like there could be more details explaining, is your website multilingual? That the live event is going to be, but how will you market it to all these different Asian cultures and people outside of them? But in general, very excited about this. I think the marketing efforts in general could use a little more emphasis around, are there digital assets? Are we in social media? Are we printed? It sort of felt like everyone's just going to know about this event instead of a strategic approach to how that's going to be rolled out.
Are there any comments from other panelists? Yes, Bailey.
The main thing that I want to talk about or focus on is I felt like the accessibility portion was really unclear. Like they have ideas for some stuff that they think they might need for accessibility purposes, but since they're hosting it at a public park, I think they maybe should have included more of like what is already being implemented at that public park accessibility wise, because it's like we don't really have anything to go off of what's already there and available, like specifically like the bathroom accommodations. Like they're saying they might order a special portable bathroom situation for people with disabilities, but it's like what does those public places already have in place, I think would be something to include within the accessibilities. That way, like we can kind of gauge if this is the appropriate accessibilities that they would be needing for this proposed event. But that's the only little note that I have.
Any other thoughts?
I have one real similar to that, and Brooke might have hit it, or the first speaker might have hit it at the very end, but Kind of the same thing, in terms of language accessibility, the proposal includes specialized adaptation service for non-English speaking communities. But I would like to see professional communities. It seems like we maybe can infer that, maybe whatever the Asian language is being spoken, they'll have an interpreter there, but it seems like it's somebody from that's in the application or the group itself, as opposed to actually hiring a professional to do it. But that might have been mentioned at the very end of the first panelist. Thank you.
Jesus?
Thanks, everyone. Any additional thoughts or comments on this application? Anything that hasn't been stated that you were thinking about? If not, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Georgian, Bailey, and Brooks and Susan, thank you. Our next application up for review is Respect Gallery. Brooks and Georgian are our primary and secondary, and Brooks, whenever you're ready to begin.
Respect Gallery is looking to do on-site installations and art shows, potentially looking for a new physical location. So they have a space now, and they're trying to negotiate what will be next. This project, for me, always interested in finding new spaces. They specifically note trying to represent underrepresented artists. They tend to use that term fairly broadly amongst artists in general, and then later extend that to say women, LGBTQIA+. It seems as though there is a little, the focus is really on the creation of art and artists in these alternative spaces over everything else. There's not a lot of details provided about their history of serving marginalized communities or those in danger of cultural erasure, or even what the specific impact on them are. I think they do have a very detailed explanation of their leadership. I'd be interested to know if they had any other oversight on exhibitions, for example, if there's an advisory board that helps to inform those decisions. I think, again, I'd like to know exactly how these art exhibitions would directly impact key constituencies within Austin, as opposed to just the general public. A fair bit of information about that intersectionality. I thought their ADA access was difficult in their current physical location. And it's hard to say then in the future, if they move, what that would be like. I think, I tend to things that like the gallery height, braille, signage labels, or any sort of touch tours they could do for the physical exhibition that would gain some more accessibility would be great. Language seems to be very aligned with the products that they're delivering. I think that's on point for what this is looking for. Yeah, I guess let me stop there and let somebody else chime in. It was a lot.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Georgian, secondary.
Sure. I agree with everything she says there. I think they have a long history of serving Austin, but again, across the entire application, it was the lack of the focusing on marginalized communities. I think that's really what it was for me. The ADA as well. For me, beyond the required ADA, that's what I'm looking for. Beyond the standard. Wheelchair accessibility, that type of stuff. So what else are they planning or are they able to do or try to accomplish beyond that? Marketing, I think that reaching new groups wasn't noted in there. Or it was noted, sorry, it was noted how they're going to reach new groups. But I'd like to see a little attention toward the marginalized groups and how they're going to try to bring in tourists. Didn't necessarily see that specifically in there. And then the leadership across the board. I think they understand the head cultural understanding is what I have here. So, and that's about it. Thank you.
With that, do we have any other thoughts from other panelists that can add to or that may contradict in any way what has already been said? Are there any questions or concerns?
I think just to follow up on the notes about marketing, I also didn't notice any mention of efforts to reach audience members with disabilities or audience members whose primary language is not English.
Thank you. For the marketing question, it is asked that you address things such as tourists, new audience members within the key constituencies, et cetera, as has been noted. So that is why the panelists are making those comments. I will state that if the applicant does score high enough to receive funding, they will be required to post their funded activities on Visit Austin, which is a website with the Austin Convention and Visitors Bureau that will reach tourists. But again, how you reach tourists specifically in your marketing plan is one of the points that should be covered. With that being said, are there additional comments that have not been provided yet for this application? Thoughts that you have that have not been provided by someone else? If there are no further comments on this application, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Susan, Georgian, Bailey, and Brooks. All right, and we will pause the recording. And we are back from break. We are continuing our reviews. Next up for review is 19th Festival. Bailey and Brooks are our primary and secondary. And Bailey, whenever you're ready to begin.
All right, so just quick overview. So 19th Festival, their proposed event is a annual celebration of Juneteenth. They'll be held at East Austin's Rosewood Park. The event will have live music, artisan crafts, cooking demos, and more. And their key constituencies are African American residents, artists, musicians, culinary experts, and entrepreneurs. Overall, I thought the applicant was really strong, really exciting, a really fun proposed activity that would really bring a lot of community engagement, I believe. One of the things that I was a little bit unsure of further down in the application is they have some good ideas on the accessibility that they want to include in their event. But I was just a little bit unsure because it's a little bit disconnected with the budget for the accessibility portion. It just seems like maybe the budget needed to just be adjusted a little bit more for the accessibility accommodations because they have a lot of things that they want to implement, but it wasn't really mimicked in the budget. And also just a bit more clarity of like, they have all these accessibility things that they want to implement, but just more of like how they're planning on implementing it. Let's see. Same with, I think marketing was pretty strong. Let's see. Yeah, I really think all of the other components were pretty strong in my opinion. The only one that I just had a comment was about the kind of unsureness of if the budget was taking into consideration these accessibility things that they wanted to incorporate. But yeah, strong application.
Thank you. Secondary, Brooks?
I would agree, lots of strengths here. I think obviously the timing and the location of this event is also in huge support of their mission and their key constituencies. I would like to see some more details about who sits on those advisory boards specifically. They list a number of them, which is great that they have so much input, but I'd like to know who really is part of that. Also a more detailed list of the actual activities. So again, lots of support documentation in the past of things that have happened, looks very vibrant, but what is for this coming year? What does this look like point by point? Intersectionality, which is a really challenging category to explain. There's a lot of listing of the different types of identities that will be present. But I'd like to see more of an explanation of how do those come together and what's the impact of bringing them together. That, for example, are you going to have an activity booth about intergenerational female learning? You know, is that something, or how does that actually get reflected in the content? Not simply many different identities will be present. I think, again, accessibility in these public open spaces is a challenge. Things like even the window height for food trucks is something that you might be able to address, or live captioning of your event itself, if there's something that you can do. Possibly a little more emphasis on multilingual signage was the only other piece that I had in mind.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any other feedback from other panelists?
Yeah, I wanted to just add on an additional point about the cultural leadership and some of the vagueness of that response. So Festival Advisory Board was mentioned, but I also felt community partners could have been a little bit more specific in its description of who those community partners are, because they talk about how it aligns with the broader community goals and initiatives, but it would be helpful to describe who they consider part of that community.
Okay. If there's no other feedback from panelists, Jesus?
Thank you, everyone. As DJ said, if there's any additional comments, I'd like to stop and give you a little bit of time. See if anything like, oh yeah, I did want to mention that. Or if there's anything that you differ on that has been stated, or any additional comments.
As a reminder, Jesus,
Mhm.
earlier commentary was surrounding the budget, that you all, if an applicant is funded, that you all do work with them on the budget.
Correct.
And so I want to make sure that there's an alignment there, and we're not necessarily penalizing one group or one applicant where we haven't in the past. So this is my part where I make sure that we have equity in
Equity.
place.
Even
And
if
so-
it's something I didn't mention. So yeah, if there was something about the budget, we do look there. There was what was a budget comment again?
I just
Bailey?
made a quick comment that it seemed like they didn't list all the accessibility things that they wanted to include. It just seemed
I
like a
see.
bit like shortened version in the budget. But yeah, if you guys work on them with it, then I don't see it being an issue.
Yeah, no, we do work, and I was looking at that as that comment was being made. They do talk in their accessibility about various things, and then in the budget, they have $500 for accessibility services for interpreters / language subscripts. So we do advise in our optional application workshops. Not all applicants attend them; they're not required, but you know that the budget should reflect the application as a whole. So if it's mentioned in the narrative, there should also be, you know, some kind of line item for it in the budget. So I think that comment is valid about what was stated in the accessibility, but only seeing limited items. Some of the items may be, there may not be a dollar cost associated with that. So just keep that in mind as well when you're reviewing the budget. But I think those are all good comments and good things to keep in mind as you are scoring these applications. With that said, any additional comments or thoughts on this application? Seeing as there are none, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Georgian, Brooks, and Susan and Bailey, thank you. Our next application up for review is Charlene, Suzanne, Franz. Georgian and Bailey are our primary and secondary. And Georgian, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, so this is an application for the Museum of Fine Arts. The applicant is wanting to rent out the Lewis Shanks building, try to receive funding to rent out the Lewis Shanks building to put on display for art at that location. From the get-go, the applicant does a great job of detailing what the Museum of Fine Arts has done in the past in terms of putting on shows and sponsoring shows, and they've have clearly been a big part of Austin over the years in terms of for 34 years, as they know, of serving the Austin art scene. They're highly involved in Austin's art scene. What appears to be missing in the application is a focus on marginalized populations. They do note, the applicant does note that the shows will include activities for everyone and for race, gender, etc. And it's open to everybody, but there's no focus toward trying to, specifically, what are we going to do to try to enhance the focus on the marginalized society groups. Race, class, and gender is acknowledged by being included in all shows and activities. Accessibility did note that they're saying they're going to hire somebody for Braille, which was appreciated, and then also the ramps and elevators in the building, which are standard ADA requirements. Did note that they're going to bring in hire non-English speaking individuals. They're going to hire translators for the Spanish speakers. They're also using volunteers from the local church for that. Marketing, they note that they're using their website and flyers. I would like to have seen a little bit more other platforms if it's possible. How are they going to bring in tours from the outside? It is the Museum of Fine Arts, but are they going to market out to those groups? Are they going to use other multimedia websites such as anything, Twitter, Facebook, internet, other than their website and flyers. Outside of that, I would like to see the production fees, production costs in terms of the budget. That's not there, but again, I think the application is, they're trying to rent the building and put the art there. So, production fees may not be there, so beyond opening their doors. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Secondary, Bailey?
Yeah, so I definitely agree this applicant has a lot of community experience and has done and participated in a lot of events. I do think overall most of the responses were a bit unclear for me. Like starting in the key constituencies, it felt more as if they were just kind of listing out some of their past community history of services more so. Like I just really didn't understand quite who the targeted key constituencies were, specifically relating to the like at-risk communities. I just didn't really see it there. And along with that, the history of service. Similarly, it just seems like they didn't really, it's hard to match the history of service if there's no clear key constituencies. Because it just felt very broad. It just kind of talks about the community as a whole, not really so like these really specific cohorts of people that we wanted to kind of be focusing on in the applications. Let's see. Same with like cultural leadership. It is clear that this person is someone who is very invested and does a lot within their community. It's just unclear of, again, what is that specific community? It's just, yeah, it was just a lot of really unclear. I was just left with a lot of overall questions. See if I had anything else. Yeah, and like intersectionality, they're like everyone is welcome to be included, which I feel like is kind of maybe not the goal. Like maybe we need something that is a bit more specific than just, everyone can be included within this event, which is great, of course, but I think it still goes all the way back to the missing the key constituencies portion. But yeah.
Very helpful feedback by the panelists. Do we have any other panelists that wishes to weigh in or offer a differing opinion?
I don't know about a differing opinion, but I will say that this proposal does not align in any way with the objectives of this funding. And that's hopefully that doesn't come off as too harsh, but I don't see any intentionality behind it to do that or to work towards that. What I see is, traditional forms of representing cultural value in the application. So we've been at this a long time, which as a native Austinite, I know that the Museum of Fine Arts Austin has been a project that has, needed support, needed to get off the ground. We haven't had one. And so I see, in this proposal, like, give us support, give us respect. We've been at this for a long time. We've done this and that and the other. And, while that's all important, it is not a fit for this funding in any way. And I think, to some of the earlier points about intersectionality specifically, like it's just not enough to say that we're going to serve everybody without any of that intentionality, knowing what these funds are supposed to be paying for and rectifying. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you so much for that. Anyone else? With that, Jesus?
Thank you. And I will say, if the applicant is watching either now or the recording later, that we do ask the panelists, or they have to score based on how the application answers the items in the scoring rubric. So the project may be, maybe a good project and deserving of funding, but it does need to address the review criteria in order for the panelists to fully score the application. With that being said, we've got about 2.5 minutes left. Any additional comments or thoughts on this application? If there are no further thoughts on this comment, or on this application, excuse me, if there are no further comments on this application or thoughts, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Susan, Bailey, Georgian, and Brooks, thank you. Our next application up for review is Art Island. Susan and Georgian are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, I'm doing that thing where I pull up my notes very, very slowly. My apologies.
No problem. The 10-minute timer will start once Susan starts giving her commentary.
Okay. So the Art Island project, as a reminder, is called People's Popsicle Stand, which aims to engage people in advocacy around specific social issues. Some of the strengths in this proposal, I think, were in the description of the project. That's very clearly stated what the goal of the project is, which is to source policy topics from their key constituencies, which I felt was communicated very clearly. And their project advisory committee. And so, there's definitely some evidence of buy-in and co-creation in the event, specifically around, the subject matter that they want to showcase, or, if you all recall reading this one, putting the policy notes or maybe language from policy on popsicle sticks and handing them out to people. But, it wasn't clear from the description of their leadership whether there's any lived experience driving this project and the constituency communities, which they identify as marginalized communities, including women, non-binary, LGBTQIA, and BIPOC folks. So that's how they, that's how they define their key constituencies, but I didn't really get a clear sense in the cultural leadership response as to whether or not they themselves have that lived experience as well. I think, the project, it potentially fulfills the mission of the Elevate grants by promoting social change through elevation of underrepresented voices. And I think, this is described exceptionally well in the section on intersectionality. Gosh, that's a mouthful, section intersectionality. And the methods they describe in making the event accessible are all valid. I think, overall, a really great event. In terms of accessibility, maybe there isn't a clear plan for implementation. At least that's how I read it. Or mention of any trained professionals that would be involved in the project. But the language accessibility response was a bit more detailed, a bit stronger in that regard. I think also they sort of missed how their event would be marketed to new audiences. Overall, like a very interesting project, and I like, especially, I'll reiterate that their process involves sourcing policy topics from their key constituencies. So that to me was a core strength of the proposal. Opportunity creation, I didn't see clear links between this event and the opportunities that would be created as a result, or the broader impact beyond wanting to promote conversations about specific policies. What happens next as a result of this, or what are the outcomes of this project potentially. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Secondary, Georgian?
For me, I like the application as a whole, all the way through. I thought they had hit most of the areas there. I do like what she's saying, and it's making me have to think about a couple things here. But they had, multiple leaders sharing their talents across the board, multiple media platforms being used. I see the visual aids there, even texting, which is first that we see today with that. They have a long history with 25 multimedia events. I thought all across the board, it looks like a good application. And I'm looking to see if there's anything, leadership and/or lived experiences. So the budget looked good, marketing looked good. Nothing grabbed my attention in terms of, outside of what might have been already mentioned. Okay. Thank you.
Any other feedback from the panelists? An agreement or something that hasn't been said before, or a feeling that hasn't been shared? Okay, with that, Jesus.
Brooks, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that, and the cultural leadership portion has this wonderful resume of all of these individuals, but without really speaking to their lived experiences within. So that is the only other thing I'd like to highlight. Thank you.
My apologies for missing you earlier, Brooks.
Oh, no, she was right when you were talking, DJ, so it's fine. We did seem to have kind of divergent opinions on this application, and we aren't working on consensus. I know Georgian was saying he was rethinking some of his scores. Again, you can change your scores, but you're not required to, depending on the feedback. But Brooks, what were kind of your thoughts on this application? And then we'll move over to Bailey after that, since we do have diverging opinions, it seems like.
Yeah, I guess my takeaways were that it was a very interesting approach to just to public art, to this interactive experience, and to addressing concerns, political concerns within the constituency. So I like that approach, but it did feel a bit disconnected from the actual communities and the impact that it would have. That, trying to figure out, again, intersectionality and what is the real effect? How do we actually see each one of those things? It just felt a little as though we have a project that we want to do. It's a really strong project. We have all these components that we're pulling together. And by the way, it comes from this community as opposed to being rooted within the community and evolving out of that.
Thank you. Bailey, your thoughts?
Just again, kind of furthering and kind of taking everything that's already been said and summarizing my experience with it. I mean, overall, it is like a very strong application in my opinion. I do like that there's a lot of like, it's very, very descriptive. It's clear and concise. But, you know, I mean, this is the whole point of the panel that now I'm seeing that there is little like discrepancies that I'm like, okay, yeah, that's just something that I didn't really think about. So I don't know if I have like the answer yet, but this is something that I'm now kind of taking in and thinking of. But I do still think it's a strong application, but I just, yes, thinking through things.
Yes, no, that's perfect. We've got just under 3 minutes left. So, and that is part of, you know, someone mentioned earlier, that's why we have the panel process. Again, we're not trying to come to consensus, but if there are insights or thoughts or something that a fellow panelist says that makes you think of something in a different way, whether that's raising or lowering your score. And again, you know, maybe it doesn't change your score at all, but it does give you a chance to think on it. You think on it and you keep your score the same way, you know, no right or wrong answer. We have you all on as individuals for your various areas of expertise. So just over 2 minutes left for this application. Any additional thoughts or comments? Anything that hasn't been stated already? Or new insights? If there are no further comments on this application, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Susan, Bailey, Georgian. And that's fine, Brooks. That's why I give you a little bit of time and you are done with your finalizing your score as well. Thank you. Let's see, our next application up for review is Printmaking Universe. Susan and Brooks are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, so the Printmaking Universe proposal focuses on a 2-day woodblock printing workshop at Flatbed, specifically serving people who are experiencing homelessness. And so I think, let me go through my notes here. One of the strengths, I think, of the proposal is that this gallery, they speak about how they want to branch out and work with people who are unhoused, this community that they haven't really served in the past, but are wanting to expand, you know, their scope of work and their key constituencies. However, you know, it wasn't serving people who are experiencing homelessness wasn't necessarily foundational to their organization. And also found that some of the points about the diversity and experiences and backgrounds of artists who have worked in the space is discussed, but the project isn't specifically represented by those communities that are at risk of displacement and or cultural erasure. So that wasn't really a key focus of the proposal or the key constituencies, really. I think one of the strengths of the project is that there's a clear opportunity creation here, and that there's income that would be generated by you know, this work that's produced by people experiencing homelessness. So that's, you know, something that in partnership with Art from the Streets that they would be able to do. And so there is there's a lot of positive aspects to this application as well. I think I already mentioned cultural leadership, not really any clear lived experience there. Also to that point, oh, here, I've had a little bit of a brain fart. Yeah, it just seemed like the intention of the project was sometimes unclear. Like they have the description of the project and what they hope to achieve through the project, but the impact of it beyond, creating some income for people experiencing homelessness was kind of lost on me. I also feel like the intersectionality response was a bit broad and not specific about how intersectionality would be incorporated into the activities. Also accessibility, I didn't feel like there was much beyond the ADA requirements for compliance and the accessibility of buildings and spaces. So not much detail provided there as well to base my score on. But yeah, I think just generally, the project is worthwhile, just not very clearly aligned with the mission of this grant, the objectives of the Elevate grants. And lastly, a note on the budget here, I didn't see any payments to artists, which to me was a really crucial thing that was, important to me in terms of, opportunity creation for the people that they sought to serve.
Thank you. Secondary, Brooks?
Yes. So I think Flatbed has a very long history of creating great artwork and supporting artists in their career paths. I think this is a very noble project to bring in a group of people who do not often have access to the art world, period, but also training and the supplies. Knowing that printmaking is a very expensive art to be into, this is I see the reasoning behind this, but I would agree that there are ways that it doesn't feel quite equipped to do all of this yet. I would specifically note trying to understand the real impact of this, that there does seem to be a huge amount of room for intersectionality to say our primary goal is to find people, the unhoused community, but within that, here are all those the ways we see that reflected, whether it's through ethnic or racial groups, women, LGBTQIA, all of the things that we support through this grant. And to then extend that and say, is the outcome really just artwork? Is it training? Is this job training? Is it income? I needed some more details on that. And I agree that it feels misaligned to not be paying artists stipends, but be saying that we're trying to work on income for these individuals. Also acknowledging that, again, printmaking is very expensive. And so I understand they have a line item for the cost of those artists being part of the program, just like any of their residencies would have. So that I think that's where we're sort of missing the link, is how do we bring intersectionality forward? And again, maybe get an advisory committee that works directly with the unhoused population, advocacy groups that can lend some more support and knowledge to how to really serve the constituencies. So that I'll be.
Bailey, go ahead.
Yeah, so kind of jumping off of that, something that I was a bit concerned about with the application, although it is like this really wonderful and exciting idea, accessibility for this population is something that I would be concerned about, because I think Brooks is saying, having a group that worked one-on-one with that community and knows more about it, but I think I wanted more clarity of one, how is this, how are the people who are within the unhoused community going to be able to even attend these events? Because it talks about the funding going towards covering their supplies and their memberships and the orientation fees and those types of questions, but I think there's a lot more things that need to be thought through of how to make this event really fully functioning. And then also with it being, the culminating part of the event, like a show of the produced works, it also makes me kind of question what is that community gaining from having that workshop and those printmaking experiences and then their work being shown, like what exactly were the overall goals and how are they assisting that community within them were one of my biggest questions.
Okay, thank you all for that feedback. Are there any other comments? Concerns, questions? All right, Jesus.
All right, we have just under 2 minutes left on this application. Any additional thoughts or comments that have not already been stated? Even if your sentiments are the same, do you have any comments that are different from what other panelists have stated? Seeing as there are no additional comments, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Georgian, Susan, Bailey, and Brooks. All righty, thank you, everyone. Our next application up for review is Script School. Brooks and Susan are our primary and secondary. And Brooks, whenever you're ready to begin.
As soon as I can scroll through the thing.
Sure, yeah, no problem. The 10-minute timer will start whenever you start giving your commentary.
Okay, Script School, just to refresh everyone's memory on the project, is working with low-income and minority students to help them find their voice through film and document these unique stories. They do clearly lay out low-income communities, communities at risk, labeling specifically LGBTQIA+, and BIPOC communities. And then, yes, they're tapping into their networks of artists and creative businesses to really build this program with social impact. I think things that I saw in this that they're really focused on low income specifically as a group, as a sort of a container for how their product is best serving folks. And then within that start to segment how else that's seen. I do like that they call out things around trying to preserve cultural identity through the storytelling. I think it seems a little bit more of a reach when they're talking about economic empowerment, as these are students, and I'm not sure that we're quite to the point where it's an immediate turnaround of economy in that moment, but I do think that path building is very important. I think that again, low income students seem to be core to their mission and from the foundation, but that it has evolved to be more around our key constituencies in danger of erasure or displacement. Cultural leadership, I think there's sort of half of the people they've listed are clearly rooted within our constituencies, have lived experiences there, and then 2 are sort of I think hard to define in terms of whether they align or not. And there's great resumes again on here, but maybe a little bit more information of the collaboration that happens amongst these folks and the actual decision making of who decides what. Cultural activities do seem as though they're going to be giving back, that is, this idea of empowering with knowledge that you can continuously take with you. It's not a commodity. It's not something exchangeable. It's something that you gain and is yours, and then you make your own forever. I hope that their language then also includes that sort of give back to the community part of it. The like, you now have this, share it with someone else. I do feel like they've labeled out their intersectionality well, that they can specifically name not only the groups and identities, but where we see these points of tension or elevation because of the way things cross over and how it makes it even more difficult or more barriers come into play. So that seemed like they had good understanding of that. For me, accessibility, you know, it was a little light on the details, or I shouldn't say light on the details, but yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I read the wrong notes. They did clearly explain their ADA access, and they had a multifaceted approach to all the different components of their access. Language also seemed as though they demonstrated knowledge of how to support non-English speaking and non-hearing communities both. Marketing seemed well thought out. I really like the idea of advertising on Airbnb as a way to get into the tourist community as well. Hadn't heard that yet. It was very creative. Notes to fair payments to artists in their budget was appreciated as usual. In general, I thought it was, you know, a strong application.
Thank you. Secondary. Susan.
Yeah. So I share a lot of the same sentiments around the project and the proposal. I think one of the strengths is that, you know, the project does a really good job of you know, describing the importance of focusing on these communities that they outline as their key constituencies that are potentially at risk of cultural erasure. I agree on the point about economic opportunity as well. I think that's a very, very good point. You know, they talk about equity also specifically in terms of equity-focused teaching, which I thought was a strength, you know, to disrupt patterns of educational disenfranchisement. But, you know, I did review the attachments and background on this organization. I didn't necessarily do that for every organization, but I found, you know, their focus doesn't really appear to be specifically on communities that face systemic barriers or threat of cultural erasure. So I agree on the point that, you know, maybe this is an organization that has evolved to serve these key constituencies because the proposed project seems to be a departure from their typical programming and aims. Also to the point on cultural leadership, it's, you know, seems diverse, but at the risk of frustrating a few people, I want to make an annoying comment. I think it seems a bit misleading to allude that the challenges of UK immigration and integration are similar to those of Austin's dominant migrant communities like Hispanic, Latino, Asian, and African communities. And that's specifically in reference to the description of cultural leadership saying, you know, I'm an immigrant, and so I understand, what was it? The challenges faced in social integration. But when you're coming from a white country to another white country, I would argue that those challenges, it's just a bit misleading and left bad taste in my mouth, to be very frank and perfectly honest. Otherwise, you know, I feel like they're very good at narrative. And I think, you know, I hope that this redirection in their programming sticks, and all of the things that they hope to achieve and accomplish in terms of outcomes that they spell out in this project are accomplished. But yeah, just conflicted a bit on this one.
Let's discuss further. You know, purely based off of the feedback that I'm getting from you all, there's a large, seems to be like, maybe we can have further dialogue so we can bring you all closer together in at least understanding why you scored the way that you did, or if not, as Jesus has already said, you are under no requirement to change your scores, either to raise them or to lower them. But when we have this type of diverging conversation, if we have time, I think we should explore a little bit more. So Georgian, why don't you jump in? We have 2 minutes, please, and explain how you feel about this particular application and why.
All right. As far as the application goes, I'm good. If we want to talk about this specific point here, Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm looking where it says is an immigrant to the United States. I'm looking for the England comment as well. I was looking for. I see the New Zealand comment, but the individual there is an indigenous actor. Yeah, I I agree. I'll say that I agree with Susan in the terms of in the sense that being an immigrant from anywhere is different from being an immigrant from anywhere else. I'll say it that way. But I know immigrants from England that are Black, and when they're back home in England, they don't necessarily consider themselves Black. They consider themselves English. When they come to America, it's whenever they realize how divided the country is, and so they may be a little bit of that shock when they come to America, which I've seen and heard in the past. For example, a simple example, I have a friend that, I didn't know I was Black until I came to America, it's what she says. Okay. In England, we're just British, and is what it was. And so, but again, I don't see England here. Like New Zealand, again, it is next to Australia, next to the Commonwealth, coming from.
Okay.
So, yeah. But again, indigenous actor. So anyway, but it would be different, but not completely different, not completely unidentifiable. But that's all.
We have just over 20 seconds left for additional insights or comments on this panel, on this application.
I just want to say that the England thing came from my own looking into the organization and the About Us page on their website. So that's how I knew.
10-4. I appreciate it. Yeah, I was looking here. Sorry. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are, sorry, I muted myself, not stop the timer. We are at time for the application. As you're finalizing your scores, we do let the panelists, if they are familiar with firsthand knowledge of your work, and or if they went to your website, to your social media, we allow them to use that as they are scoring the application. We're not scoring on consensus, but we do have a robust discussion. Panelists can change their scores, but are not required to, as DJ mentioned earlier, depending on the feedback that they get from their fellow panelists. So saying all of that, as panelists are finalizing their scores, there is no additional commentary as we are at time for the review of this application. But if you would let me know when you have completed finalizing your scores for this application. Brooks, Bailey, Georgian, and Susan. I was also talking a bit because we do need, because, figured you might need a bit of time. We are also, as Susan is finalizing her score, we have 2 more applications to do. We are scheduled for a break, so we can go through the other 2 applications, or we can go ahead and take a break now, whichever the panel would prefer. And I'll leave that up to the rest of y'all as Susan is finalizing her score.
I'm open either way.
Okay. So Susan is good. Do we just want to power through the last 2 applications? Yes? Okay. I know looking at a Zoom screen for extended periods, that's why we try to have these breaks on the hour. But since we have 2 more, we will go ahead and continue. So our next application up for review is On Lawn Farm. Bailey and Brooks are our primary and secondary. And let me get my timer ready. And then Bailey, whenever you're ready to start.
Okay, so overview of the proposal. So the proposed event is producing a documentary that will be titled Preserving Culture and Heritage, the Vietnamese Community in Austin, and along with that, a cultural exhibition. And the cultural exhibition will have an interactive experience with a documentary screening, mannequins displaying regional styles, curated artifacts, and more. I think overall, this is a very strong and concise and clear application. I think their key constituencies groups is very strong and very clear of what their goals are. It states here that, quote, "My goal has always been to create opportunities and provide platforms for underrepresented communities and to recognize and celebrate their stories within that." So the only Constructive criticism I think I had within this is that in the language accessibility portion, I know that the Vietnamese community is their primary focus, but if their goal is to bring awareness to their community, I think maybe having some alternate language accessibility would have been a nice option, because I think, if I'm not wrong, that they mostly included just Vietnamese and English within their accessibility. So I think, knowing how diverse Austin is, I think that would be a good idea to include, to have included more than just that within there. But yeah, let's see. I think that's really my biggest note. Yeah, lots of very strong ideas and applicants within this. So yeah, I think literally just the language accessibility. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Secondary, Susan?
I think it's me, actually.
Yes, it is. I was looking at the script school, the one before, so I'm sorry. Thank you,
Wanted to
Brooks.
double check. Sure. Yeah, I really appreciate that this not only brings forward sort of traditional cultural practices around Tet and Aoyais and things that may be more easily known or more traditional, but then layers on this tech side of augmented reality and an interactive digital display and fashion sort of in this mix. I would love to see a little more detail given to how that generational intersectionality happens, along with gender identity, perhaps, and how that could be seen within these different cultural practices in this interactive display. The budget seems very well balanced. The only thing I would note is just that supplies and materials seem pretty high comparatively. And I understand that a lot of it's probably tech equipment, but that did sort of flag for me just a little bit. I also noted that the language accessibility was excellent for Vietnamese and English, but did not acknowledge perhaps Spanish speakers or any other accessibility needs, even sort of ASL things that would be helpful. So in general, a very strong and I agree, concise application.
Okay, so part of my role is just to do my best to keep it honest, the process, and keep that lens on equity. So a question that I'd like to present to the panelists is, how did you all determine the leadership, the decision-making power, leadership? Did anyone have any feedback, particularly on that particular aspect of the grant? Okay. I know I sprung that on you, and while you're looking, that is a weighty part of the grant. And the reason I asked that specific question is because I'm seeing, again, there's quite a gap in the commentary and the initial scoring. And it's not to get you to change your scoring in any way, but I would think that it is very important to have, we have the time to really delve into asking why you may have done something a particular way if the language is not matching up. It's not aligning. And I think I'm seeing an example of that again. And it's hard to say, they didn't have this, but I think it's a perfect application. How does that work? Where does that come from? And I'm hoping one of the panelists would jump in. Does anybody have any feedback?
I think the only thing I would add to that sort of question, though, is in the case of an individual artist applying who is from within a key constituency, creating work for that same sort of core group, is it necessary to have other influence, or how do we reflect? I mean, particularly in decision, right? It's not the same as, hey, it's an organization. It's one person who's getting the money, who's making the decisions and doing stuff. So I think that's where how I was making my decision of it's sort of a solo exhibition, right? One person putting together things for within that community.
I think that's a beautiful question, Brooks, and a very relevant one. And I'm asking based off of past commentary on other applications where I heard almost the exact opposite. And so at a point, you know, we all have implicit bias, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything untoward, but we do bring our biases with us. And there are examples where listening to you all offer your feedback on other applicants, where I feel like I heard the exact opposite kind of justification for your scoring choices. Like I would have scored them higher, but they didn't have any, I didn't see how they didn't, it would have been nice if they mentioned how they brought people in to help them inform their decisions. And in this case, I'm hearing the exact opposite. I'm not picking on this applicant. If you guys feel like they scored strongly, that's fine. But I do need to bring up that I did notice that there seems to be a lack of consistency in some cases.
Yeah, I think I'll try to speak to that or chime into this conversation that I think we're having. Where to Brooks's point, you know, it's an individual versus an organization. It's an artist who would receive this money and produce this documentary. I suppose maybe we can speak about other applications where the commentary was, you know, who is involved in decision making beyond the, you know, individual who's running the show. Like, where do they get their direction from? How are they incorporating voices of people in their key constituencies? And I think maybe the distinction to draw here is just in the type of project that it is, and that it is a documentary that is interviewing a lot of people. And so I feel maybe I scored this one high, saying the majority of the leadership have deeply rooted understanding and lived experience, without question, because, you know, they're capturing people's voices in the project as a whole. I think it's accomplishing that through just having a series of interviews and highlighting those experiences of other people.
Bailey, so you had your hand raised, just under a minute.
Very quick thing. So I definitely see where DJ is coming from, because this applicant, they were very, like, again, introspective of what their own personal experiences were, and less so like how they're representing that community. But I think maybe the difference here is that she's making it very clear that these lived experience are connecting back to her initial values within celebrating that culture and preserving that cultural heritage. And that I think that maybe wasn't always the case for some of the others that were more like introspective versus like externally serving.
Thank you all
And
for the feedback.
9, 8, final comments?
I concur with the 3 panelists. Sorry, DJ.
No, no, sorry. Just as long as you guys are, you know, I'm here to make sure you're being as thoughtful and as true to this process as possible. And so if you're comfortable, then my job is to be comfortable too.
Thank you. And we are at time for this application. But yes, thank you, DJ, for making sure we are keeping equity centered in our decisions. That is why we have DJ here. So if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores on this application and let me know when you have done so. Georgian, Susan, Brooks, and Bailey. All right, and we are on to our final application for review today, which is Poet Hawkins. Georgian and Bailey are our primary and secondary, and Georgian, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay, so Poet Hawkins, the applicant wants to provide a space for artists to further their talents. Wants to put together a workshop to encourage and support and empower songwriters that live in the Austin area, and artists, writers, hobbyists, and working musicians. Has a long history of songwriting himself, he says, 25 years, but and then the last 4 years, it seems like he was a songwriting and performing is what I got there. Leadership, it's a plus and a minus. It seems to have a strong support system of other artists in the Austin area, but not anybody that's actually attached to the application itself. Maybe just people that he's worked with or he's known over the course of his or her career, the applicant's career. And so, again, plus or minus, it's good to have that support system out there, but do we know that support system is going to be there whenever it's time for the project to be developed? And that may or may not be the case. But it appears to be a strong established relationship with numerous other artists in the Austin area. Intersectionality was noted, using a diverse group of artists, but not specifically focusing that in the proposal itself. I think the proposal a little bit I think it needs to focus more on marginalized populations as opposed to just the general Austin audience across the board. He does note, the application does note it is open to everyone henceforth, but again, what specifically is being done other than open it to everyone. Using pre-established ADA venues, but not necessarily expanding on accessibility. So that's standard, what's required by law. I'd like to have seen a little bit more than that. Language was good, using sign language interpreters and hosting non-English events. The budget, I thought it was adequate. I would like to have seen some costs for what where the applicants indicating in accessibility. I think that was a miss. I think the proposal was good. I liked it. It seems they really wants to give back to other local artists, and after 25 years of performing in Austin or songwriting in Austin, wants to help others, try to come behind them. Just probably needs to focus a little bit more on marginalized populations as a whole across the application. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Secondary, Bailey?
Yeah, so it is very clear that this applicant is very passionate and involved within their community, but it is another one of those cases where I just feel like the key constituencies just aren't really aligning with what the guidelines were asking for. So it's another one of those, like, the key constituencies are just a bit too broad. Just emerging writers, hobbyists, musicians, etc., from all backgrounds. While that's really great, but I just think we needed to have focus a bit more on like these really specific at-risk communities within Austin, which I think that this was just a bit too broad to be able to focus heavily on that. And then along with that, the history of service. This is another one of those moments where it is very like self-focused, like this is what they have focused on within their community, the things that they have contributed, but it doesn't really talk much about how what they've done has actually assisted those communities. And again, what exact communities are those? Because I think the key constituencies were just too broad. But otherwise, I mean, it is a really exciting event, and I would love to see and go to it, but I just think for the purpose of the grant, it isn't exactly aligning with those communities.
All right, is there any feedback from the other panelists?
I guess I would just note that I felt like this application required a lot of extra work on the part of the readers in order to like really understand who this individual was. That really digging through their support materials, going and seeing what their website or Instagram was, helped to sort of understand this more and the perspective, but that Had I not done any of that, it was not clear in the writings. So I think the things that were being said by everyone, I would echo that there's a lot of great ideas in here, but need more support for what the project really is and the impact on those communities. It's just not stated. It is not said out loud. But thank you. I hope you have a good luck in your songwriting career. Thanks.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else? Okay.
Just echo a bit of what Brooke said, having done a little bit of outside research myself. I feel like this is potentially a case where, you know, they just maybe don't have a lot of experience in grant writing, and it's otherwise like a really good project with just a few tweaks in just specifying, again, those key constituencies. And I don't know, I suppose like as an artist, applying for funding as an individual artist versus part of an organization, perhaps it's difficult sometimes to think about your project in those terms and really translate what the solicitation of the grant is asking for. And that's not to say that artists can't read a solicitation and understand what it's asking for. I just think that, you know, they want to talk about what they bring to the table and how welcoming and inclusive and you know, non-exclusionary their art is, but maybe not having that practice and okay, but I have to also articulate like who I'm targeting here through that, versus having that kind of just overall welcoming mindset and wanting to include diverse people from all backgrounds and ages and identities. I think that it would just, yeah, it would just take a little bit of more experience in grant writing and seeking funding like this to be able to turn this application into a stronger one.
Thank you, panelists. We do advise panelists to look beyond grantsmanship to the extent that if they do have to go and they can use personal knowledge of the applicant or their work, or if they go to the applicant's website or social media, can use that information as long as it's, you know, that information that they've researched themselves, you know, on your social media or website, they can utilize that information in scoring their application. And then personal firsthand knowledge if they're familiar with you or your work, but only if they know it, not if, you know, their friend is familiar with your work. It has to be them themselves. 2 minutes left for reviewing this application. Any additional thoughts or comments on this application? If there are no further comments, any differing opinions, or even if you if you concur with the opinions but have a comment that hasn't been stated yet. If there are none, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Brooks, Bailey, Georgian, and Susan. All right, and that concludes our panel for today. And we will stop the recording.